The cursor blinked on the empty screen, mocking me. File not found. I refreshed again. Still nothing. My hands trembled as I navigated to the backup folder. Empty. The cloud drive. Deleted. 5 years of research, 300 pages of analysis, countless interviews, field studies, and breakthrough discoveries in renewable energy storage. Gone. Mom? I called out, my voice cracking. Did someone use my computer? She appeared in the doorway of what used to be my room, now converted into my sister Brianna's content creation studio, complete with ring lights and a pink backdrop. At 32, I'd moved back home temporarily after my apartment building had a fire, just for a few months while I finished my PT. That was the plan. Oh, that old laptop. Brianna needed space for her TikTok drafts. You know how important her platform is now, 50,000 followers. Mom beamed with pride. She's basically an influencer. The world tilted. You deleted my files. It's just typing, Meredith. Do it again. She shrugged, already turning away. Besides, your deadline isn't for another month, right? 6 weeks, actually. 6 weeks to defend my thesis that no longer existed. 5 years of documenting revolutionary battery technology that could change how we store solar energy. Gone for TikTok videos of my 22-year-old sister doing makeup transformations and pranks. Mom, I grabbed her arm. That was my doctorate, my entire thesis, years of research. Dad wandered in, drawn by the shouting. What's all the noise? She deleted my thesis, I said, tears burning my eyes. My entire PhD thesis. He glanced at the laptop and at me. Her followers matter more than your boring paper, Meredith. Brianna's actually making money. When was the last time your chemistry stuff paid a bill? Chemistry stuff, my groundbreaking research into graphene-based supercapacitors that 3 major tech companies were already interested in. But to them, it was just chemistry stuff. Brianna sauntered in, phone in hand, recording everything. Oh my God, are you seriously crying over homework? That's so cringe. This is totally going viral. My sister's mental breakdown over school. She held the phone inches from my face as I sobbed. The red recording light blinked like an evil eye. Please, I begged. Please tell me you have it somewhere. The recycling bin. Another drive. Anything. I cleared everything, Brianna said cheerfully. Needed room for my brand partnerships. I'm working with Fashion Nova now. They sent me like so much stuff. She pivoted to show her outfit to her phone camera. Speaking of which, you need to move your science junk out of the garage. I'm turning it into my photo studio. My science junk. The prototype batteries. The testing equipment I bought with my meager stipend. The physical proof of my research that could have helped reconstruct my thesis. That night, I sat in my car in a parking lot, calling my advisor through tears. Dr. Harrison's silence stretched long after I explained. Meredith, she finally said, her voice heavy. Without your thesis, without your data, I have to report this to the committee. You'll likely need to start over or withdraw from the program. Please, there has to be something. I'm sorry, the defense date can't be moved. Other candidates are waiting. If you can't produce your work, she didn't need to finish. I slept in my car that night, unable to face going back. My phone buzzed with notifications. Brianna had posted the video. PhD MELTDWMN. Is higher education worth it? Already 100K views. The comments were brutal. Strangers calling me entitled, spoiled, a crybaby academic who couldn't handle real life. But between the cruel comments, I noticed something else. Tech professionals asking about my research. Engineers wanting to know more about the graphene supercapacitors. A few even recognized the implications of what I've been working on. One comment stopped me cold. Wait, is this the M. Thompson who published that paper on enhanced energy density in hybrid capacitors? That research is revolutionary. Someone please tell me she has backups. I didn't, but I had something else. Something my family had never bothered to understand. I had a mind that remembered. For the next 3 days, I lived in the university library. I reconstructed what I could from memory, from printed drafts I found in my office, from email correspondences with colleagues. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to prove the work existed. More importantly, I started documenting everything else. My family's treatment wasn't new. It was just the culmination. I've been keeping receipts, literally and figuratively, for years. Every time they'd used my scholarship money for Brianna's pageants. Every time they'd missed my academic awards for her recitals. The graduation they skipped because Brianna had an Instagram meet and greet. But now I had something new, evidence of destruction of intellectual property. The university's legal counsel was very interested in my case, especially when I showed them the video Brianna posted, proof that my family had deliberately destroyed academic work, the potential patent applications, the corporate interests. This could be considered theft of intellectual property, the lawyer mused, especially if you can prove the value of the research. I could, because what my family didn't know was that 2 weeks before they deleted everything, I'd had a preliminary meeting with Quantum Power Solutions. They'd offered me a position upon graduation, with a signing bonus of $150,000 and stock options, all contingent on my thesis defense. That offer was now in jeopardy. But Quantum's CEO, Dr. Angela Wu, had seen Brianna's video too. "Is it true?" she asked when she called. "Your family destroyed your research for social media storage?" "Yes," I admitted, shame burning through me. "Send me what you've reconstructed." "And Meredith?" "Start documenting everything. We might have legal grounds here." She wasn't the only one interested. The video had backfired spectacularly on Brianna. Tech Twitter had picked it up, and not in the way she hoped. #JustAsForMeredith started trending. Scientists and engineers shared their own stories of family members not understanding their work. The narrative shifted from crybaby academic to groundbreaking researcher sabotaged by TikTok influencer sister. Fashion Nova pulled Brianna's partnership within 48 hours. "We cannot be associated with the destruction of educational advancement," their PR statement read. Other brands followed suit. But I wasn't done. See, Brianna's entire online presence was built on a lie, the wealthy lifestyle she portrayed, funded by credit cards in my parents' names, the luxury apartment she claimed to live in. She was still in my childhood bedroom. The car she showed off, leased under my credit because hers was too poor. I knew all this because I'd been the one managing the family finances since I was 18. My parents were terrible with money, and I'd stepped in to help. I had access to everything, every receipt, every bill, every fraudulent claim. I also had the passwords, because Brianna, for all her tech-savvy influence, used the same password for everything, Princess 2001. I didn't hack. I didn't need to. I simply logged into the family cloud storage I'd set up years ago, the one they'd forgotten existed because it wasn't on the laptop, and downloaded everything. Years of tax documents showing they claimed my educational expenses as deductions while pocketing my scholarships. Proof that Brianna's self-made influencer story included PPP loans she fraudulently obtained for a business that didn't exist. The IRS whistleblower form was surprisingly simple to fill out. But the real revenge came from an unexpected source. My reconstructed thesis. Working from memory and salvaged pieces, I'd actually improved on my original research. The pressure, the anger, the determination to prove them wrong had pushed me to insights I'd missed before. My advisor was stunned. "This is Meredith. This is better than your original work. The new approach to electrode design, the efficiency calculations. How did you?" "Turns out starting over wasn't the worst thing," I said. I defended my thesis 4 days before the deadline. The committee was mesmerized. Word had spread about my situation, and the room was packed. Dr. Wu from Quantum Power was there. So were representatives from Tesla's battery division and a venture capital firm specializing in clean energy. I passed with distinction. The job offers started immediately, not just the original quantum position, but competing bids. Tesla wanted me. A startup in Singapore offered relocation and equity. The venture capital firm wanted to fund my own company. I chose the startup. The moving bonus alone was more than my family had ever seen. The day I left was the day the IRS notices arrived. Mom called, hysterical. "What did you do?" "They're auditing everything. They're saying Brianna committed fraud." I documented everything, I said calmly, loading boxes into my new Tesla, a signing perk. "Just like you taught me, keep receipts, right? But she's your sister. And I was your daughter. Didn't stop you from destroying my life's work. It was just typing." "No, Mom. It was revolutionary research into energy storage that could help combat climate change. It was 5 years of my life. It was my future, and you deleted it for TikTok videos. Dad grabbed the phone. You're destroying this family. No, I corrected. I'm documenting it. Big difference. Brianna's downfall was swift and public. The IRS fraud investigation made news. Her remaining sponsors fled. The wealth she portrayed crumbled, revealed as smoke and mirrors. She tried to spin it as cancel culture, but the internet had receipts now, many of them provided by anonymous sources who happened to have access to family financial records. My parents lost the house trying to pay back taxes and penalties. The last I heard, they'd moved into a small apartment, the walls too thin to film TikToks without noise complaints. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was in Singapore, leading a team developing the next generation of energy storage. My reconstructed thesis had been published to acclaim. The patents were filed. The technology was moving from prototype to production. A year later, I gave a keynote speech at an international energy conference. The title, Innovation from Ashes: How Destruction Breeds Revolution. I talked about my research, yes, but I also talked about resilience, about how sometimes losing everything forces you to build something better. How the greatest discoveries often come from the deepest failures. The standing ovation was gratifying, but not as gratifying as the email I'd received that morning from a high school student in Bangladesh who'd read my paper and was starting her own experiments with graphene capacitors. Your work inspired me, she wrote. My family doesn't understand either. They think science is a waste for girls, but you proved them wrong. I smiled, remembering my own family's dismissal. Their reduction of years of work to just typing. Their inability to see value in anything that didn't get likes or views. They were wrong, of course. My thesis wasn't just typing. It was the foundation of a technology that would help power the world. It was jobs for hundreds of people. It was inspiration for young scientists. It was proof that knowledge, once created, can never truly be destroyed, only transformed. My phone buzzed. Brianna had tried to add me on LinkedIn. Her profile now listed her as a social media consultant with a community college degree in marketing. I clicked ignore. Later that evening, I video called my team to discuss our latest breakthrough. We were on the verge of something extraordinary, a battery that could store solar energy for weeks, not hours. Game-changing technology. As I explained the technical details, sharing my screen filled with equations and molecular diagrams, I thought about Mom's words, just typing. No, I thought, watching my team's excited faces as they grasped the implications. This was never just typing. This was the future, and they deleted themselves from it. The conference ended with an announcement. Our startup had just secured Series B funding at a valuation of $500 million. My equity stake was worth more than my parents would see in 10 lifetimes. But the real value, the 14 patents filed, the 3 products in development, the 57 employees whose families were supported by our work, the potential to reduce global carbon emissions by millions of tons, all from typing they thought didn't matter. That night, alone in my Singapore apartment overlooking the city lights, I opened my laptop and created a new document. Not a thesis this time, but a book proposal. The story of how destruction became creation, how betrayal became breakthrough, how a deleted file led to an energy revolution. I typed the title, More Than Just Typing, a memoir. The cursor blinked, waiting. This time, I had backups, multiple clouds, physical drives, redundancy upon redundancy. But more importantly, I had something my family never understood, the knowledge that creation isn't about the files we save. It's about the minds that refuse to stop creating, even when everything is deleted. Especially then.
The polished mahogany table felt cold beneath my clammy hands. Mr. Nichols, our family lawyer for longer than I'd been alive, cleared his throat, the sound echoing too loudly in the stuffy room. And to my granddaughter Naomi, he read, his voice a dry rustle of old paper, I bequeath the entirety of my residual estate. My breath hitched. Gran. She'd always said, "This is for you, Naomi, for your future. Don't let anyone tell you different." My name is Naomi, by the way. And for a fleeting second, a tiny, fragile bird of hope fluttered in my chest. A fresh start. A way out from under my father's suffocating scrutiny. Then Julian, my father, chuckled. It wasn't a warm sound, it was the kind of chuckle that always preceded a pronouncement, usually one designed to put me in my place. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on that cold, expensive table, his eyes so like mine, yet so much colder, fixing on me. That familiar condescending smirk played on his lips. I knew that smirk. It had haunted my childhood, my teenage years, every small achievement he'd managed to belittle. "Well, that's very generous of dear old mother," he said, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with something sharp. "Of course, Naomi, you understand that a sum of this magnitude requires careful management," I frowned. "I understand, Dad. Gran always said she trusted me." "Oh, darling," he said, the darling like a verbal pat on the head. "Trust is one thing, prudence is another. You're young, you're not exactly known for your financial acumen, are you?" My Uncle Clay, sitting beside him, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. He just stared at a spot on the table, his jowls quivering slightly. He always did what Julian told him. Always. "So," Julian continued, his smirk widening, "Clay and I have discussed this at length with Mr. Nichols. For your own protection, of course. The inheritance will be placed into a secure trust. Clay will be the primary trustee. He knows best how to handle your money, darling. He has a knack for these things." The air rushed out of my lungs. "A trust? But Gran wanted me to have it." My voice was small, shaky. I hated how weak I sounded. "And you will, in a manner of speaking," Julian said, waving a dismissive hand. "You'll receive a regular allowance, enough for your needs. Clay will ensure the capital grows, provides a steady income. It's the sensible thing to do. You're just not responsible." Each word was a tiny poisoned dart. Not responsible. Me, who'd worked part-time jobs since I was 16 to have any spending money of my own, because his support was always conditional and grudging. Me, who'd managed to get decent grades despite the constant tension in our house. "I don't agree," I said, trying to inject strength into my voice. "I want to manage my own money. Gran wanted me to." Mr. Nichols cleared his throat again. "Naomi, the trust structure is quite common in these situations. Your father and uncle, as trustees, will act in your best interest." "My best interest?" I looked from Julian's smug face to Clay's averted gaze. "Or theirs?" Julian's eyes narrowed. "Now, don't be ungrateful, Naomi. We're doing this for you, to prevent you from squandering what your grandmother worked so hard for." He leaned back, the picture of magnanimous authority. "It's settled. Clay will arrange for your first allowance payment next week." Clay finally looked up, a flicker of something, pity, guilt, in his eyes before it was quickly extinguished. "Yes, Naomi, we'll take good care of it for you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But I was 22, just out of university, with a useless arts degree Julian had insisted on, and they held all the cards. My protests were swatted away like annoying flies. The meeting ended with Julian clapping Clay on the back, both of them looking immensely pleased with themselves. Mr. Nichols offered me a weak, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. The first allowance arrived a week later. A pathetic sum, barely enough to cover the rent on my tiny, bleak studio apartment and a week's worth of instant noodles. I sat on my lumpy mattress, the cheque clutched in my hand, the paper crinkling. The amount was an insult, a clear message of my perceived worthlessness. Through the thin walls I could hear my neighbours arguing. The air in the room was stale, heavy with the smell of damp and defeat. I closed my eyes and all I could see was my father's smirk, that triumphant, knowing smirk. He thought he'd won. He thought I was a silly, incapable girl he could control forever. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, colder, a resolve that settled into my bones. They would pay for this. Every last condescending smirk, every dismissive word, every penny they thought they could control. They would all pay. The next 5 years were a masterclass in humiliation, served cold and often. My allowance, as Julian so generously called it, barely stretched to cover rent on a succession of increasingly depressing basement apartments and a diet that consisted mainly of instant noodles and discount bread. I juggled 2, sometimes 3 dead-end part-time jobs: barista, bookstore clerk, late-night shelf stacker, just to afford textbooks for the community college courses I secretly enrolled in, and to occasionally buy vegetables. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was living like a pauper while my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, was supposedly growing under the expert management of my father and Uncle Clay. Their lives, in stark contrast, blossomed. My social media feeds, which I morbidly scrolled through in the dead of night, became a gallery of their newfound opulence. Julian, with his arm around his new, much younger wife, Gemma, a woman who'd appeared shortly after the trust was established, beaming from the deck of a yacht in the Mediterranean. Uncle Clay grinning beside a gleaming new sports car, the kind he'd only ever dreamed of. Lavish dinner parties at Julian's renovated house, Gemma dripping in jewels, raising a champagne flute in a toast, her captions full of hashtags like "Pasht, blessed" and "Why living our best life," all I knew with a sickening certainty, funded by trust income. Our phone calls were rare and excruciating. Julian would adopt a tone of strained paternal concern. "Are you managing, Naomi? Eating properly? Clay tells me the investments are doing wonderfully. You should be grateful." Gemma, if she was on the line, would chime in with a saccharine, "We do so worry about you, dear. It must be so challenging." The unspoken "for someone like you" hung heavy in the air. Each word was a fresh stab, a reminder of their betrayal and my powerlessness. The degradation was constant, a slow burn that fueled a rage I kept tightly coiled inside. I learned to smile weakly, to murmur vague assurances, to end the calls as quickly as possible before the bitterness choked me. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift where a customer had screamed at me for 5 minutes because his latte wasn't hot enough, I sat in my cramped room, the smell of stale coffee clinging to my clothes. I was tired, bone-achingly tired, but the anger was a live wire. I wouldn't just get mad, I'd get even. That night I filled out the application for a competitive MBA program, focusing on finance. It was a long shot, my academic record was patchy, my funds non-existent, but the thought of their faces when I finally confronted them was a powerful motivator. Against all odds, weeks later, an acceptance letter arrived. The real turning point, the moment my simmering anger began to sharpen into a focused weapon, came about a year into my secret studies. I'd called Julian about something mundane, a forgotten childhood memento I hoped he might still have. He was dismissive, clearly busy. "Can't talk now, Naomi. Gemma's got a fitting for her new boutique. Big launch party next month." Then just before he hung up, I heard him say to someone in the background, presumably Uncle Clay, his voice carrying clearly, "Don't worry, she'll never be smart enough to figure anything out. Just keep the income flowing for Gemma's new boutique. It's keeping her happy." He didn't even bother to make sure I'd hung up. The casual cruelty of it, the utter contempt in his voice, stole my breath. Gemma's boutique. So it wasn't just holidays and cars. They were siphoning off funds for her vanity projects. My grandmother's money, meant for my future, was being used to stock designer handbags for a woman who probably thought fiduciary duty was a brand of perfume. That night, sleep was impossible. The image of Gemma, preening in her new shop, funded by my stolen legacy, burned behind my eyelids. My resolve, already firm, solidified into something unbreakable, something diamond hard. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was weak. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The MBA program was a beast. Financial accounting, corporate strategy, investment analysis. The concepts were dense, the hours brutal. I was often the last one to leave the library, fueled by lukewarm coffee from a thermos and a gnawing hunger that the Trust's pittance couldn't quite satisfy. Juggling classes, assignments, and my part-time job at a campus coffee shop to cover living expenses felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. There were nights I'd stare at a spreadsheet until the numbers blurred, the sheer weight of it all threatening to crush me. Loneliness was a constant companion, a shadow clinging to me as I navigated a world so far removed from the one Julian and Gemma inhabited. It was during a late-night study session hunched over a corporate finance textbook that I met Phoebe. She was just as stressed, just as caffeine-dependent, but she had a quick wit and a surprisingly sunny disposition despite the academic pressure. "You look like you're about to declare war on that textbook," she'd said, offering me half of her sandwich. We became fast friends, study partners, and eventually she became the only person I trusted with fragments of my story. Her outrage on my behalf was a balm, her unwavering belief in me a lifeline. One afternoon in Professor Davies's ethics class, he was lecturing on fiduciary duties, the legal obligation of one party to act in the best interest of another. "A trustee," he'd said, his gaze sweeping the room, "holds a position of immense trust and responsibility. Mismanagement or self-dealing is not just unethical, it's a serious breach." A spark ignited in my mind. It was more than a spark. It was a flare, illuminating a potential path through the darkness of my situation. Armed with this new understanding, I began requesting the annual trust statements. Mr. Nichols' office would send them over, always a few weeks late, always with a curt cover letter. They were professionally printed, full of jargon and deliberately vague. Portfolio growth, management fees, investment service charges. The numbers seemed designed to obfuscate rather than inform. But with my growing financial literacy, I started to see patterns. The management fees paid to Clay were consistently high, suspiciously so. The investment service charges were astronomical for a portfolio that, according to their own bland summaries, was delivering only modest returns. My requests for more detailed breakdowns for specifics on these charges were met with condescending brush-offs from Uncle Clay, usually via email, CCing Mr. Nichols. "Naomi dear, these are standard industry practices, very complex, best leave it to the professionals." Or, "The trust is performing well, no need to concern yourself with the minutiae." Julian, if I dared to bring it up with him, would simply laugh. "Still playing at being a businesswoman, are we? Focus on your studies, darling." Their dismissiveness only fueled my suspicion. There was something they weren't telling me, something hidden beneath the glossy veneer of those statements. Then, one evening, while procrastinating on a particularly difficult derivatives assignment, I started digging, not into the trust directly, I knew they'd have that locked down, but into Gemma. Public business registries were a goldmine. It didn't take long to find it. Gemma's Chic Boutique LLC registered a few months after the trust was established. And then, the kicker, a record of a significant capital injection into the LLC, listed under private equity placement. The source wasn't named, but the timing, the amount, it lined up too perfectly with a large, vaguely described alternative investment withdrawal on one of the earlier trust statements. My blood ran cold, then hot. This wasn't just them skimming the income, living large on the dividends. They were dipping into the principal. My grandmother's hard-earned money, the core of my inheritance, was being funneled into Gemma's frivolous business venture, a vanity project. The rage that had been a simmering ember now roared into a conflagration. They weren't just careless, they were actively plundering it. Getting my hands on the full original trust deed felt like a covert operation. I called Mr. Nichols' office, affecting a slightly ditzy, overwhelmed student persona. "Mr. Nichols, hi, it's Naomi. I'm so sorry to bother you, but for one of my university assignments, a really boring hypothetical case study, I need an example of a trust document. I was wondering if I could possibly get a copy of, mine." There was a pause, then his secretary, a flustered woman named Doris, said she'd have to ask. An hour later, she called back. "Mr. Nichols said it's highly irregular, Naomi, but as it's for your education, you can pick up a copy." I could almost hear Julian's voice in the background, probably telling Nichols to humour the silly girl. The document was a brick, pages and pages of dense legalese, clauses and sub-clauses designed to intimidate and confuse. I spread it out on my small desk, the cheap particle board groaning under its weight. For weeks, it became my obsession. Between classes, during my lunch break at the coffee shop, late into the night, I pored over every line. My textbooks on trust law and financial regulations became my constant companions. I cross-referenced terms, looked up precedents, highlighted sections until the pages were a riot of yellow and pink. Phoebe would find me asleep at my desk, face pressed against a particularly convoluted paragraph about trustee liabilities. "You're going to give yourself an aneurysm," she'd say, gently shaking me awake. Meanwhile, Julian, Clay and Gemma seemed to be escalating their spending. Perhaps they sensed the 5-year review period for the trust. The vow echoed in the silence of my tiny, bleak apartment. They will all pay. But saying it was one thing, surviving long enough to make it happen was another. The next 5 years were a masterclass in humiliation, served cold and often. My allowance, as Julian so generously termed it, was a cruel joke. It barely covered the rent on a succession of increasingly depressing basement flats, each with its own unique collection of peeling paint and questionable stains. Instant noodles became a food group. I learned to tell the difference between a dozen brands, rating them by how little they tasted like cardboard. Discount bread, often a day or two from expiring, was a treat. To supplement the pittance, I worked and worked. Barista shifts starting at dawn, smelling perpetually of burnt coffee. Retail jobs where I folded sweaters for hours, smiling vacantly at rude customers. Late-night shelf stacking in supermarkets, the fluorescent lights buzzing over my head like angry insects. Each job was a dead end, each paycheck a reminder of how far I had to climb. My hands were perpetually rough, my back ached, and sleep was a luxury I couldn't always afford. Meanwhile, my phone, a cheap second-hand model, became a window into their glittering world. Julian, Clay, and a new woman, Gemma, Julian's much younger, glossier wife, who'd conveniently appeared after the trust was set up, seemed to live exclusively on Instagram. There was Julian, grinning from the deck of a yacht in the Mediterranean, arm around Gemma, who was draped in something floaty and expensive. "Another tough day at the office. Shakor blessed Tan making memories," the caption read. Uncle Clay, looking like a stuffed sausage in a linen suit, posed beside a cherry-red sports car I knew for a fact he couldn't have afforded on his old salary. Midlife crisis? Nah, just enjoying the fruits of good investments. Hard work pays off. Gemma especially loved to flaunt. Endless posts of designer shopping bags, Michelin-starred meals and lavish parties at Julian's newly renovated house. A house Gran had always said was too ostentatious. Her captions were often dripping with faux humility. "Just a little something to brighten the day. Retail therapy, nah, so grateful." Each post was a fresh twist of the knife. My grandmother's money, my future. Their rare phone calls were an exercise in biting my tongue. "Naomi, darling, are you managing all right?" Julian would ask, his voice oozing a concern so fake it was almost transparent. "Clay tells me the trust is performing exceptionally well. You should be very pleased." "Oh, yes, Dad, thrilled," I'd reply, staring at a leaking pipe in my current hovel. Gemma would sometimes get on the line, her voice like honey mixed with arsenic. "We do so worry about you, sweetie. It must be so challenging for you, all on your own. Are you eating properly?" Instant noodles are surprisingly versatile, Gemma, I once said, unable to stop myself. There was a slight pause. Oh, well, as long as you're happy, dear. Happy. The word felt like a foreign language. The constant degradation, the casual cruelty, the sheer obliviousness. It all swirled inside me, a toxic brew. But it didn't break me. It did the opposite. It forged something hard and sharp within my core. One particularly bleak evening after a customer had thrown a lukewarm coffee at me because it wasn't artisanal enough, I sat on my lumpy mattress, the smell of cheap coffee and righteous indignation clinging to me. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror. Tired eyes, pale skin, clothes that had seen better days. This wasn't me. This wasn't who I was going to be. I wouldn't just get mad. I would get even. That night, huddled under a thin blanket for warmth, I used the flickering Wi-Fi from the cafe downstairs to secretly research MBA programs. Finance specifically. If money was their weapon, it would become mine too. It was a wild, audacious plan. My grades from my useless arts degree were average, my funds non-existent. But the image of their shocked faces, the thought of wiping those condescending smirks away, was a powerful fuel. Weeks later, an acceptance letter from a decent, if not top-tier university arrived. I'd have to take out student loans, work even harder, but it was a start, a path. The final, irrevocable hardening of my resolve came about a year into this new, secret life. I'd called Julian, a rare occurrence, to ask about some old family photos Gran had kept, hoping they hadn't been thrown out in his relentless pursuit of modern minimalism. He was, as usual, dismissive. "Can't talk now, Naomi. Gemma's in a flap about the launch of her new boutique. Very high-end. Big investors." He sounded bored, like I was an annoying interruption. Then, just as I was about to hang up, I heard him say, clearly to someone else in the room. Uncle Clay, I presumed, by the subsequent mumble of agreement. "Don't worry, she'll never be smart enough to figure anything out. Just keep the income flowing for Gemma's new boutique. It's keeping her happy and, happy wife, happy life." He didn't even bother to check if I'd disconnected. The casual, brutal dismissal. The confirmation that my inheritance was actively funding Gemma's vanity project. Smart enough. He thought I was an idiot. The line went dead, but his words hung in the air, cold and sharp. My breath caught in my throat. A chill snaked down my spine, but it wasn't fear. It was ice. Pure, unadulterated, vengeful ice. "Oh, I'm smart enough, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "You just wait and see." The MBA program was a relentless beast. Financial accounting felt like learning a new language, one spoken entirely in spreadsheets and balance sheets. Corporate strategy involved dissecting case studies of failed companies, a grim but educational pastime. Investment analysis made my head spin with talk of derivatives, alphas, and betas. I was often the last person to stumble out of the university library, eyes gritty from staring at a screen, my backpack heavy with textbooks that cost more than my monthly food budget. My part-time job at the campus coffee shop, though a step up from previous gigs, meant early mornings and the constant smell of espresso clinging to my clothes. There were nights I'd fall asleep face down on my notes, a half-eaten bowl of instant ramen cooling beside me, the sheer exhaustion of physical weight. "You look like you're about to wage a one-woman war against that discounted cash flow model," a voice said one evening. I jumped, nearly knocking over my lukewarm coffee. A young woman with bright pink streaks in her dark hair and an amused smile stood by my table in the near-empty library. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. I'm Phoebe. We have advanced corporate finance together." "Naomi," I managed, rubbing my eyes. "And yes, I think the DCF model is winning." Phoebe pulled up a chair. "Tell me about it. I swear Professor Armitage enjoys watching us suffer." She offered me a piece of her chocolate bar. "Survival rations. That was how I met Phoebe. She was sharp, funny, and refreshingly down to earth. We started studying together, quizzing each other, complaining about impossible assignments. Slowly, cautiously, I started to let my guard down. I didn't tell her everything, not about the trust or the full extent of my family's betrayal, but I told her enough for her to understand the pressure I was under. Her unwavering support, her "You got this, Naomi," before every exam, became a small island of sanity in my otherwise turbulent life. One afternoon, in Professor Davies' ethics seminar, he was lecturing on fiduciary duties. He was a stern, old-school academic with a piercing gaze. A trustee, he declared, pacing in front of the class, is entrusted with the assets of another. Their duty is singular, to act solely in the best interest of the beneficiary. Any deviation, any self-dealing or gross negligence is not merely an error in judgment. It is a profound breach of trust with significant legal consequences. His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Solely in the best interest of the beneficiary. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Just keep the income flowing for Gemma's new boutique. That lecture was the catalyst. Armed with a new terrifying vocabulary, fiduciary duty, breach of trust, mismanagement, I started to act. I drafted a polite, formal letter to Mr. Nichols' office, requesting copies of the annual trust statements. For my personal financial planning, I wrote, hoping it sounded plausible. A few weeks later, a thick envelope arrived. The statements were professionally printed, glossy, and utterly uninformative. Columns of figures under headings like portfolio allocation, realized gains, and administrative expenses. The numbers were large, but the explanations were non-existent. I spread them out on my tiny desk, Phoebe looking over my shoulder. "What are discretionary management fees?" I asked her, pointing to a hefty sum deducted quarterly. Phoebe frowned. "Usually what the trustee charges for managing the investments. But that looks high, especially if Clay isn't a professional fund manager." He wasn't. He was a failed real estate agent before Julian had apparently decided he had a knack for money. I emailed Uncle Clay, CCing Mr. Nichols. "Dear Uncle Clay, I was reviewing the latest trust statement and had a few questions about the management fees and some of the investment service charges. Could you perhaps provide a more detailed breakdown?" His reply came a day later, dripping with condescension. "Naomi, my dear, these are rather complex financial matters. Standard industry practice. The trust is performing very well under my stewardship, and Mr. Nichols oversees everything. There's really no need for you to worry your pretty little head about the details. Just enjoy the benefits." Julian, when I tried to ask him during a brief, strained phone call, just laughed. "Still playing at being a financial whiz, are we? Honestly, Naomi, some people just aren't cut out for numbers. Leave it to the experts." Their dismissiveness was like waving a red flag at a bull. If it was all so standard, so above board, why the secrecy? Why the patronizing tone? One evening, fueled by cheap coffee and righteous anger, I decided to do some digging beyond the opaque trust statements. If they were funneling money, where would it go? Gemma's boutique. It was a long shot, but I typed Gemma Butler business registration into a search engine. It didn't take long. Public records for new businesses were surprisingly accessible. Gemma's Chic Boutique LLC, registered just a few months after Gran died. My heart began to pound. I kept digging, sifting through online databases, business registries, anything I could find. And then I saw it. A filing related to the boutique's initial capitalization. Under sources of funding, alongside a small business loan, was a very large, very specific sum listed as private equity placement. I scrambled back to the trust statements from that first year. My eyes scanned the investment activities section, and there it was, a withdrawal of an almost identical amount, vaguely categorized as strategic allocation, private venture capital. My breath hitched. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring. It wasn't just income they were spending. It wasn't just lavish holidays and new cars from the profits. They had taken a huge chunk of the principal, my grandmother's actual savings, the core of my inheritance, and invested it in Gemma's ridiculous, overpriced shop. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a surge of icy rage so intense it made me tremble. They weren't just living off the interest, they were actively draining the well. This wasn't mismanagement, this was theft. The discovery about Gemma's boutique lit a fire under me. I needed more than just vague statements and public records. I needed the source document, the blueprint of their betrayal, the original trust deed. Getting it from Mr. Nichols, however, required a performance. I called his office, pitching my voice a little higher, injecting a note of hapless student confusion. "Doris, hi, it's Naomi. So sorry to bother you again." Doris was Mr. Nichols' long-suffering, slightly scatterbrained secretary. "You know that university assignment I mentioned? The one on trust law? Well, my professor, he's a real stickler for details, and he said I need to analyse an actual trust instrument, not just a summary. I was wondering, and this is probably a huge ask, if I could possibly get a copy of, the full deed for Grand's trust. Just for the hypothetical case study, of course. I promised to be super careful with it." There was a long pause filled with the rustling of papers on Doris's end. "Oh dear, that's highly unusual, Naomi. Mr. Nichols keeps those documents very secure." I know, I said, trying to sound apologetic and a little desperate. "It's just Professor Armitage is really strict, and I'm worried about my grade. It would be such a massive help." "Let me speak to Mr. Nichols," she said finally. "I can't promise anything." An hour later, my phone rang. It was Doris. "Well, Naomi," she began, her voice still hesitant, "Mr. Nichols said, he said it's against his better judgment, but seeing as it's for your education and you are the beneficiary, he's authorised me to provide you with a copy. You can pick it up this afternoon. But he stressed it's for academic purposes only." I could almost hear Julian's voice in the background of that decision, dismissing me. "Let the girl play with her papers. What harm can she do?" "Oh, Doris, thank you. Thank Mr. Nichols for me. You're lifesavers," I gushed, laying it on thick. The document they handed me was a tome. Seriously, it was nearly an inch thick, bound in a stiff blue cover, filled with page after page of dense, impenetrable legalese. Clauses, sub-clauses, codicils, riders. It was designed to make your eyes glaze over, to make you give up and just trust the experts. I carried it back to my tiny apartment like it was a sacred text and a ticking bomb, all in one. For weeks that trust deed became my world. I spread it out on my small, wobbly desk, the cheap particle board groaning under its weight. My MBA textbooks on contract law, trust administration, and financial regulations were piled beside it. Highlighters in yellow, pink, and orange lay scattered like fallen soldiers. I read every word, every sentence, sometimes 10 times over. I looked up legal terms I didn't understand, cross-referencing them with online legal dictionaries and my textbooks. Phoebe would often find me asleep at my desk, my cheek pressed against a particularly convoluted paragraph about trustee powers and limitations. "Naomi, you're going to give yourself an aneurysm," she'd say, gently shaking me awake and pushing a cup of coffee into my hand. "What are you even looking for?" "A loophole," I'd mumble, still half asleep. "A way out or a way in." Meanwhile, Julian, Clay, and Gemma seemed to be accelerating their spending spree. It was as if they sensed some invisible clock ticking down. Gemma's Instagram was a relentless barrage of conspicuous consumption. A new diamond bracelet, just a little Tuesday treat, just sparkle. A weekend trip to Paris, catching the last of the autumn leaves, Chacun, City of Love. And then the pièce de résistance, a post featuring her and Julian, clinking champagne glasses with the Eiffel Tower glittering behind them. The caption read, "Counting down the days to our amazing anniversary trip to Monaco, Julian is spoiling me rotten with a bonus from the Trust's excellent performance this year. So grateful for his financial wizardry. Monaco-bound, our anniversary goals, our trust fund baby, almost." The wink emoji felt like a personal insult. My trust, my grandmother's money, their excellent performance was my dwindling inheritance. The 5-year mark for the trust was approaching, a point at which, according to the initial vague explanations, there might be some sort of review. Perhaps they were trying to extract maximum value before then, thinking I was still the naive girl they'd dismissed 5 years prior. Late one night, fueled by stale coffee and a growing sense of desperation, I was on page 47, section D, subclause T. My eyes were burning, the words starting to swim. Most of it was standard boilerplate about trustee responsibilities, distribution schedules, and the like. I'd almost skimmed past it, thinking it was just another impenetrable block of text. But something made me pause. A phrase, "Conditions under which the primary beneficiary may petition for a change in directorial control of the trust assets." My heart gave a sudden hard thump against my ribs. I read it again, slowly. Such conditions to include, but not be limited to, demonstrable gross negligence or misconduct by the appointed trustees, or the attainment by the primary beneficiary of recognised professional financial certifications and qualifications deemed sufficient by an independent arbiter to demonstrate capacity for prudent financial management. My breath caught in my throat. I reread the last part. Attainment of recognised professional financial certifications. My MBA, the finance specialisation, the extra courses I was considering in portfolio management. My hand, holding the highlighter, was trembling. I carefully drew a line under the entire subclause. Could this be it? A tiny, almost invisible escape hatch, buried deep within the legal jargon, a clause they had clearly overlooked or dismissed as irrelevant for someone like me. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't over, it was just beginning. That subclause became my North Star. Attainment of recognised professional financial certifications. It wasn't just a vague aspiration anymore, it was a specific, actionable target. My MBA was a solid foundation, but the wording recognised professional financial certifications hinted at something more, something industry standard that would be undeniable. I threw myself into researching the most respected certifications in finance, the CFA, the CFP, anything that screamed competent and qualified. It meant an extra layer of intense study on top of my already demanding MBA finals. My tiny apartment became a fortress of textbooks and practice exams. Sleep became a rumour. Phoebe, bless her, turned into my personal drill sergeant and cheerleader. "Okay, question truck 512, she'd say, peering at a flashcard. "Explain the efficient market hypothesis and its 3 forms." "Weak, semi-strong, and strong," I'd recite, pacing my tiny room. "Weak form says past prices don't predict future prices." She'd grill me for hours, then make me tea and tell me I was a rock star. "You're going to ace these, Naomi, and then you're going to..." Well, whatever it is you're planning, it's going to be epic. She still didn't know the full details, but she knew enough to sense the monumental stakes. I passed my MBA exams with distinction, a small, sweet victory that tasted like freedom. Then, one by one, I tackled the certifications. Each exam was a multi-hour marathon of complex calculations and ethical dilemmas. Each pass certificate that arrived in the mail was another stone in the foundation of my plan. With my MBA diploma and the first couple of certifications in hand, I decided to subtly probe Mr. Nichols. I scheduled a brief phone call, ostensibly to ask about the upcoming 5-year review of the trust. Just wondering if there's anything I need to prepare, Mr. Nichols? Any paperwork? Oh, no, Naomi, my dear, he said, his voice avuncular and dismissive. Just a formality, really. Clay and your father handle all the substantive matters. We'll send you a summary report, as usual. Then I casually dropped it in. I was rereading the trust deed for that university project I mentioned, and I came across a rather interesting clause about the beneficiary potentially taking a more active role if they had certain financial qualifications. Section D, I think it was. Is that something that ever happens? There was a distinct pause on the other end of the line. Ah, yes, Mr. Nichols said, a little too quickly. Highly theoretical, that clause, Naomi. Very, very rarely invoked. Not really applicable to your situation, I wouldn't think. The current arrangement is serving you very well. His dismissive tone, the way he brushed it off as highly theoretical, told me everything I needed to know. He either genuinely hadn't considered its power, or, more likely, Julian had instructed him years ago to downplay it, to ensure I never saw it as a viable option. My suspicion that he was more than just a negligent old lawyer, that he was firmly in Julian's pocket, solidified. He wasn't just incompetent, he was complicit. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that lit a fire under me to accelerate everything, arrived not through my own digging, but through sheer dumb luck, or perhaps a tiny act of rebellion from a stressed-out secretary. An email landed in my inbox. The subject line was FWD Urgent, Trust Restructuring Options. It was from Doris, Mr. Nichols' secretary. The body of the email simply said, Julian, please see attached memo from Mr. Nichols RE, our discussion. Let me know your thoughts. Clay. Attached was a confidential memo from Mr. Nichols to Julian and Clay. My blood ran cold as I read it. Further to our conversation regarding the upcoming 5-year review and the potential for unforeseen claims or challenges from the beneficiary, the memo began, I have outlined several options for restructuring the trust. These amendments would serve to further protect the trust assets and solidify current directorial control, limiting the beneficiary's capacity to interfere with or alter the established management structure. They were trying to lock me out, permanently. They must have gotten wind of my MBA, or perhaps my polite inquiries had spooked them. They thought I was still the clueless girl, easily fobbed off. They were moving to change the rules of the game before I even had a chance to play. The memo detailed strategies to make it virtually impossible for me to ever gain control, to tie up the assets in such a way that only they could access them, citing long-term capital preservation and protection against immature financial decisions by the beneficiary. My hands were shaking as I printed it out. The arrogance, the deceit! Phoebe found me staring at it, my face pale. "What is it?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I just handed her the memo. She read it, her eyes widening with each paragraph. "Oh, Naomi," she breathed, looking up at me. "These guys they're ruthless." "Yes," I said, my voice tight. "And they think I'm stupid." The clock was ticking, faster than I'd ever imagined. My final certification exam was in 3 weeks. The trust review meeting would likely be scheduled shortly after. I had to be ready. The weapon was nearly forged, but my enemies were already trying to dismantle the battlefield. The misdirected email from Doris, detailing their plans to lock me out of the trust permanently, was the final jolt I needed. The game had changed. It wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine anymore. It was a race against time. My final certification exam, the capstone to my carefully constructed arsenal of qualifications, suddenly felt less like an academic hurdle and more like the key to my survival. Those last 3 weeks were a blur of frantic, focused energy. I lived in the library, at my tiny desk, surrounded by stacks of notes and empty coffee cups. Phoebe was my lifeline, quizzing me relentlessly, pushing me when I wanted to collapse from exhaustion, and celebrating every practice exam I aced. "You're not just doing this for you anymore, Naomi," she said one late night, her voice serious. "You're doing this for everyone who's ever been underestimated." The day I walked out of that final exam, my head was pounding, but my heart was light. I knew I'd nailed it. The official confirmation arrived a week later. "We are pleased to inform you that you have successfully passed." I read the words over and over, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. The weapon was forged. Almost as if on cue, the official notification for the annual trust review meeting landed on my doormat the next day. A stiff, cream-coloured envelope from Mr. Nichols' law firm. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks hence. The timing was so perfect. It felt almost scripted by a higher power with a wicked sense of irony. Those 2 weeks were spent in meticulous preparation. This wasn't just about invoking a clause in a dusty old document. It was about dismantling their empire of lies, brick by brick. I compiled everything. Copies of the trust deed with the crucial sub-clause highlighted, my MBA diploma, all my financial certification certificates, the vague and misleading annual trust statements they'd sent me over the years, and, most damningly, printouts of Gemma's social media posts showcasing their extravagant lifestyle, juxtaposed with bank statements showing my meagre allowance. I even created a concise PowerPoint presentation, a habit picked up during my MBA, summarising the trust's actual performance, or lack thereof once their exorbitant fees and Gemma's boutique investment were factored in, versus its potential had it been managed competently and ethically. I practiced my delivery in front of the cracked mirror in my apartment, over and over. I needed to be calm, factual, and unshakable. No tears, no hysterics, no emotional outbursts that they could dismiss as typical female overreaction. Just cold, hard facts delivered with the precision of a surgeon. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," I'd say to my reflection. "And Gemma, thank you for convening this meeting. I have a few points I'd like to raise regarding the administration of the trust. Phoebe helped me pick out an outfit. We stood in front of my tiny, overflowing closet, which mostly consisted of worn-out student clothes and barista uniforms. Nothing in here screams I'm about to financially disembowel my duplicitous family," Phoebe declared, hands on her hips. We ended up at a consignment store where we found a perfectly tailored dark grey pantsuit and a crisp white blouse. It was simple, professional, and made me feel about 10 feet tall. "That's the one," Phoebe said, nodding approvingly. "That says, 'I am no longer the girl you knew. I am your worst nightmare, and I have spreadsheets.'" The night before the meeting, I stood in front of that mirror again, wearing the suit. The transformation was startling. The tired, struggling student who had lived on instant noodles and righteous anger was still there, under the surface, but the woman looking back at me was different. Her eyes were clear, her jaw set. There was a quiet confidence in her stance, a steely resolve that hadn't been there before. This was Naomi Burke, MBA, certified financial professional, ready for war. My phone buzzed. It was Julian. My heart gave a nervous flutter, then settled. "Naomi, darling," his voice oozed that familiar false paternal warmth. "Just calling about tomorrow. Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing. Just a formality, as always. Clay and I have it all handled. Wear something nice, but there's no need for you to get involved in the boring details. We'll be in and out." I took a slow, steadying breath. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world, Dad," I replied, my voice cool and even. "And actually, I'll be very interested in the details this year." There was a slight pause on his end, a fractional hesitation before he chuckled, a little too loudly. "All right then, darling, see you tomorrow." He hung up. That tiny pause, that flicker of surprise in his usually unflappable demeanour, was more satisfying than I could have imagined. He had no idea what was coming. The boardroom at Mr. Nichols' law firm was exactly as I remembered. Mahogany table, leather chairs, an air of quiet, expensive intimidation. Julian was already there, leaning back in his chair, exuding an aura of smug self-importance. Uncle Clay sat beside him, looking slightly rumpled and nervous, fiddling with a pen. Mr. Nichols was at the head of the table, shuffling papers with a practised air of gravitas. And then a surprise, Gemma. She was perched elegantly on a chair slightly behind Julian, dressed in a vibrant silk dress, a large designer handbag at her feet. No doubt here for moral support, and probably to start planning how to spend the next bonus from the trust. They all looked up as I walked in. Julian offered a tight, patronising smile. "Naomi, darling. Punctual. Good." Gemma gave me a little wave, her eyes flicking over my new suit with a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise? Disdain? I took the empty seat opposite them, placing my slim briefcase on the table. "Good morning, Julian. Uncle Clay, Mr. Nichols, Gemma." Mr. Nichols cleared his throat. "Well, shall we begin? As you know, Naomi, this is the annual review of the trust established by your grandmother. Julian and Clay, as trustees, will provide a brief overview of its performance over the past year." Julian nodded, taking centre stage. "Indeed. And I'm pleased to report, Naomi, that despite some market volatility, Clay has managed to secure solid returns. Very solid. The capital is secure and the income stream remains robust." He gestured vaguely towards Clay. Clay mumbled, "Yes, quite robust. We've been very prudent." He avoided my gaze. They launched into their usual vague summary, filled with financial jargon they clearly expected me to not understand, painting a picture of diligent stewardship. I let them talk for a few minutes, watching their confident expressions, Gemma's occasional encouraging nod to Julian. Then when Julian paused for breath, I calmly interjected. "Excuse me." All eyes turned to me. Julian frowned slightly. "Yes, Naomi?" "Before we go any further," I said, my voice steady, "I have a few things I'd like to present." I opened my briefcase and took out a slim folder. Firstly, for the record, I'd like to note that I recently completed my Master of Business Administration with a specialisation in finance. I slid a copy of my diploma across the table, and subsequently I have attained the following professional financial certifications. I laid out the certificates one by one, CFA, CFP. Copies for your records, of course. A stunned silence fell over the room. Julian stared at the documents, his smirk faltering. Clay's jaw literally dropped. Gemma's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. Mr. Nichols blinked rapidly, looking from the certificates to me. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "I've taken the liberty of preparing my own analysis of the Trust's performance over the past 5 years." I connected my laptop to the projector they had at one end of the room. I'd asked Doris to ensure it was available for my notes. My PowerPoint presentation flashed onto the screen. The first slide was a simple comparison. The meagre allowance I'd received versus screenshots of Gemma's Instagram posts detailing their lavish holidays, new cars and expensive purchases, all time-stamped. Gemma gasped, her face flushing. Julian's turned a dangerous shade of red. "This," I said, clicking to the next slide, "is a breakdown of the management fees and investment service charges you've been levying. They appear to be significantly above industry standards for a trust of this size and risk profile, particularly given that neither of you possesses formal investment management qualifications." Another click. "And this is regarding the private equity placement of a substantial portion of the trust principal into Gemma's Chic Boutique, LLC, an unproven, high-risk retail venture with no discernible connection to prudent fiduciary investment strategy." I showed the public registration documents and the corresponding trust withdrawal. Clay looked like he was about to be physically ill. "Therefore," I announced, my voice ringing with newfound authority, pursuant to Section D, subclause 5 of the trust deed, a copy of which I have here, which states that the primary beneficiary may petition for a change in directorial control upon attainment of recognised professional financial certifications demonstrating capacity for prudent financial management. I am hereby formally invoking my right to assume full directorial control of the trust, effective immediately. Julian finally found his voice sputtering. Now, see here, Naomi, this is outrageous. You can't just... Actually, Father, I cut him off coolly. I can. The language is quite clear. I pushed a highlighted copy of the trust deed towards Mr. Nichols, whose face had gone pale. Perhaps you should re-familiarise yourself with the terms your firm drafted. Then I delivered the final blow. And furthermore, I'd like to draw your attention to Section E of the same deed concerning gross fiduciary misconduct, a section you all clearly overlooked. It stipulates that in cases of demonstrable mismanagement, self-dealing or fraudulent activity, not only can the trustees be removed, but there is also provision for the clawback of misappropriated funds from the personal assets of said trustees. It also opens the door for legal proceedings to recover damages to the trust. The colour completely drained from Julian's face. Clay made a choking sound. Gemma looked like she'd seen a ghost. Mr. Nichols was shuffling his papers, his hands trembling, suddenly looking terrified. The silence in the room was absolute, thick with their shock and dawning horror. Julian started to bluster again. This is preposterous. I won't allow... It's already in motion, I said calmly. My lawyers, whom I have already consulted and who are on standby, will be in touch with Mr. Nichols' office later today to facilitate the transition of control and to discuss the immediate commencement of a full forensic audit of all trust expenditures over the past 5 years. I stood up, gathering my papers, my composure absolute. The trust and my grandmother's legacy are finally in capable hands. Mine. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving them in a tableau of stunned, horrified silence. The war wasn't just won, it was a rout. The silence I left behind in that boardroom was, I imagined, quickly replaced by panicked shouting and bitter accusations. My lawyers, a sharp, no-nonsense team Phoebe had recommended from her father's firm, moved with swift precision. The clause in the trust deed was ironclad. Mr. Nichols, after a brief, blustering attempt to stall, had no choice but to concede. The transition of control was surprisingly quick. The real fireworks began with the forensic audit. My legal team, armed with my preliminary research and full access to the trust's financials, unearthed a depth of mismanagement and self-dealing that even I hadn't fully anticipated. Gemma's boutique, it turned out, wasn't just a vanity project. It was a financial black hole, hemorrhaging money that Julian and Clay had kept reinvesting from the trust to keep it afloat, and Gemma happy. There were lavish business expenses that were clearly personal holidays, undocumented loans to Clay that were never repaid, and consultancy fees paid to shell companies Julian had set up. The clawback provisions were invoked. Julian and Clay were forced into a series of humiliating liquidations. The shiny sports car Uncle Clay was so proud of, gone. Julian's collection of expensive watches, sold. Gemma's boutique stripped of its designer stock, most of which was on consignment anyway, it turned out, was shuttered, its chic facade now papered over with 4 lease signs. The equity in their homes was next on the chopping block to cover the shortfall. Their carefully constructed image of wealth and success crumbled like a sandcastle in a tsunami. Their names, once whispered with envy in their social circles, were now muttered with scorn. Gemma, true to form, didn't stick around for the downturn. Once the flow of easy money dried up, so did her affection for Julian. I heard through the grapevine, Phoebe had an uncanny ability to pick up such news, that she'd packed her designer bags and decamped, leaving Julian to face the music alone. Their anniversary trip to Monaco never happened. Julian and Clay's relationship, once a united front of condescension towards me, imploded. They turned on each other, each blaming the other for the mess, for their greed, for getting caught. Their bitter recriminations were apparently epic, further fueling the gossip mills. One evening my phone rang. It was Julian. His voice, stripped of its usual arrogance, was thin and reedy. "Naomi, darling." I said nothing. I just wanted to say, I understand you're upset, but this is destroying us. Your uncle, he's a broken man. Surely you can see there must be some room for understanding, for family. The audacity of it, after everything. I listened to his pathetic, manipulative plea, the silence stretching between us. Then, without a word, I ended the call. Some ties once severed could never be mended, nor did I want them to be. The revenge was sweet, undeniably. Seeing them brought low, stripped of their ill-gotten gains and their social standing, was a deeply satisfying vindication for 5 years of struggle and humiliation. But as the dust settled, the sweetness began to mingle with something else. A quiet finality. The family I had, however dysfunctional, was truly gone. It wasn't regret I felt, not exactly. It was more an acknowledgement of the scars, the price of justice. With the trust firmly under my control and a significant portion of the plundered funds recovered, I set about managing it properly, ethically. The first thing I did was establish a foundation in my grandmother's name, its mission to provide scholarships and grants for young women from disadvantaged backgrounds to pursue education in business and finance. Gran had always believed in the power of knowledge, and this felt like the truest way to honour her legacy. I bought a small, comfortable house in a quiet neighbourhood. Nothing extravagant, but it was mine, bought with money that was truly, unequivocally mine. No more basement apartments, no more instant noodles, unless I actually craved them, which, surprisingly, I sometimes did, a weird memento of my past. Phoebe helped me decorate, her taste far more vibrant than mine, filling the space with colour and life. Standing on my new balcony, looking out at the small garden I was planning, a sense of peace settled over me. The fight was over. I wasn't defined by their betrayal anymore, or even by the victory. I was defined by what I chose to build next. The satisfaction of justice served remained, a warm ember in my chest, a testament to the strength I'd found within myself, a strength Gran had always known I possessed. And Julian's smirk, that condescending, dismissive smirk that had haunted me for years, it was gone, vanished from his face, probably forever. That, I thought, sipping my coffee as the morning sun warmed my face, was the best inheritance of all.
The hand, cold and surprisingly strong for a woman her age, landed squarely on my stomach. I flinched, not because it hurt, but because of the familiar, sickening lurch that always accompanied Clara's touch. "Still nothing, dear?" Clara's voice, saccharine sweet with a viper's edge, dripped into the quiet living room. "That biological clock isn't just ticking, Jacqueline. It's screaming. A veritable alarm bell, wouldn't you say, Toby?" I didn't look at Toby, my husband. I didn't need to. I could feel his smirk from across the room, that little upward twitch of his lips he always got when his mother went in for the kill. He'd offer a placating, "Now, mother," but his eyes would be gleaming, agreeing with every venomous word. This time, he just chuckled, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the floorboards of my house. "She's right, Jackie. Time's a-wastin'." That was it. The chuckle, the casual dismissal, the way he called me Jackie when he was trying to sound like one of the good old boys, instead of the man who lived, rent-free, in the house I'd bought with my own sweat and tears, years before he'd even known my name. My name is Jacqueline, by the way, and for a decade, I'd been their live-in disappointment, their unpaid maid, their private chef, and the silent financier of their comfortable lives. For years, every family gathering, every quiet Tuesday night, every holiday had been punctuated by these little digs. My empty womb, my selfish career, my failure as a woman, as Toby's wife, as Clara's vessel for the grandchildren she so desperately craved. Not out of love, I suspected, but as status symbols, tiny trophies to parade before her gossiping friends. They'd sit at my table, eating the food I bought in the house I paid for, and dissect my perceived inadequacies. Clara, with her pronouncements delivered like royal decrees. Toby with his silent, smirking agreement, or worse, his active participation. Maybe if you relaxed more, Jackie. Perhaps you should see another specialist, dear. We can't just give up. The we always got me. As if this was their shared burden, their noble suffering, rather than a deeply personal and often painful subject for me. But that chuckle today, it wasn't just another pinprick. It was the final hammer blow against a dam that had been cracking for years. Something inside me didn't just break, it solidified into a cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. I didn't say anything. I didn't scream or cry or argue, as I might have done years ago, before the fight had been slowly, systematically ground out of me. I just offered a tight, brittle smile. Perhaps you're right, Clara. I'll think about it. She beamed, patting my stomach again, harder this time, a gesture of proprietary ownership. That's a good girl. See, Toby, she just needs a little encouragement. Toby winked from the sofa, where he was already flicking through channels, his part in the daily ritual of my humiliation complete. Atta girl. They mistook my silence for acquiescence, my forced smile for defeat. They'd grown so accustomed to my quiet endurance, my swallowed retorts, my weary nods. They couldn't see the shift, the final, irrevocable change in the landscape of my mind. The years of their casual cruelty hadn't crushed me. They'd forged me. Later that evening, after they'd retired to their respective rooms, Clara to the master guest suite she'd claimed as her own years ago, with a dismissive wave of her hand, Toby to scroll endlessly on his phone in our shared bed, a bed I increasingly felt was only mine by legal definition. I pulled out the folder from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in my study. It was thick, filled with documents that Mr. Valdez, my lawyer, had meticulously prepared. Mr. Valdez, with his sharp eyes and even sharper understanding of marital asset division, especially when one party had entered the marriage with significantly more. "The house is ironclad, Jacqueline," he'd said, his voice calm and reassuring during our last meeting, just 3 days ago, in his quiet, book-lined office. "Premarital property, solely in your name. No commingling of significant funds that could muddy the waters. As for the other assets, your inheritance from your grandmother, your pre-marriage investments, they are yours, untouchable." Toby knew I owned the house when we married. He just assumed, like many do, that marriage somehow magically made it ours. Clara certainly believed it. She often referred to it as Toby's house when talking to her friends, a little slip of the tongue that used to make my blood boil, but now just added fuel to the pyre I was building. They had no idea about the separate accounts I'd maintained, the trusts I'd set up years ago, the way I'd carefully firewalled my financial life from the slow, leaching drain of their presence. They enjoyed the lifestyle, the comfortable home, the nice dinners, the vacations I paid for, blissfully unaware that their access to it all hung by the thinnest of threads, my continued tolerance. And that tolerance had just snapped, cleanly and irrevocably. I traced the line on the eviction notice Mr. Valdez had drafted, 30 days. A legally generous time frame, he'd called it. Personally, I felt it was 29 days too many, but I would follow the letter of the law. It made the victory cleaner. They thought my silence was submission. They had no idea it was the calm before I unleashed a hurricane they'd built themselves. 1 more week. That's all I'd give them. 1 more week of their smug pronouncements and oblivious entitlement. Then, the storm would break, and I would be the one holding the lightning. The early days with Toby felt like a dream, a sun-drenched landscape, after years of focusing solely on my career, on building something for myself. He was charming, attentive, and made me laugh. My house, the one I'd poured my savings and my soul into, felt warmer with him in it. Clara, his mother, was introduced gradually. First, it was Sunday dinners, then extended holiday stays. "She's just a bit lonely since Dad passed," Toby would say, his arm around my shoulder, his eyes pleading. How could I say no? Slowly, insidiously, her visits became permanent. Her belongings appeared in the guest room, then spread. Her opinions, always freely given, started to dominate our conversations, our choices, our lives. The pressure for an heir began subtly, a wistful sigh here, a comment about a friend's grandchild there. Then it escalated. My career, once a source of pride for Toby, or so he'd claimed, became an obstacle. "Maybe if you weren't so stressed with work, Jackie," he'd muse, echoing Clara's more direct pronouncements. The gaslighting was an art form. "You're too sensitive, Jacqueline. Mother doesn't mean it that way. You're imagining things." My reality was constantly questioned, my feelings invalidated, until I started to doubt my own sanity. Was I the problem? Was I truly selfish, ungrateful, cold? But a part of me, the part that had fought to buy this house on my own, the part that had built a successful business from scratch, knew better. It was that part that led me to Mr. Valdez's office 6 months ago, not for a divorce initially, but for clarity. "I just need to understand my rights, my position," I'd told him, feeling like a traitor even as I spoke. He listened patiently, then laid out the facts. My foresight in keeping my finances separate, in ensuring the house title was never altered, had been my salvation. "You've built a fortress, Jacqueline," he'd said, a rare smile touching his lips. "And you hold all the keys." Over the following months, we strategized. We reviewed every document, every account. The passive income streams Toby and Clara so blithely enjoyed, dividends from investments I'd made long before Toby, rental income from a small property my grandmother left me, were all legally mine to control. He helped me draft the paperwork to redirect those funds, to secure my digital assets, to change beneficiaries on policies they didn't even know existed. Each signature was a quiet act of rebellion, a nail in the coffin of their entitlement. Last night, after the screaming biological clock incident, I called Desiree. She's been my rock, the one person who saw through Toby's charm from day one and never minced words about Clara. He chuckled. Desiree's voice was incredulous. "After she said that? Oh, honey, it's time. Past time." "The papers are ready," I said, my voice low. "Mr. Valdez says it's all in order." "Good. You deserve to live in your own house without being treated like an incubator with a faulty switch. You're strong." "You are, Jacqueline." Desiree's voice was firm, a lifeline in the churning sea of my emotions. "You built an empire while they were busy trying to tear you down. Don't you dare forget that." "I won't," I promised, and for the first time in a long time, the words felt true, not just a hopeful whisper. "Thank you, Des, for everything. Always. Now go get 'em, and call me the second those eviction notices are served. I want a play-by-play." I laughed, a genuine laugh that startled me. "You'll be the first to know." Hanging up, I walked through my silent house. My house. The polished wood floors, the artwork I'd carefully chosen, the garden I'd lovingly tended before Clara decided my roses were too thorny, and my herbs attracted pests. Every inch of it was mine, bought and paid for long before Toby had even learned to spell my name correctly. I remembered those early days, his easy smile, the way he'd look at me like I was the only woman in the world. He'd been so impressed by my drive, or so he'd said. "You're incredible, Jackie," he'd murmur, tracing patterns on my arm. "So smart, so successful." It was intoxicating. Clara, when she first started her extended stays, was all compliments too. "Such a lovely home, dear. Toby is so lucky to have found you." The shift was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it. Like a tide slowly turning, her presence became a constant. Her things migrated from the guest room to the main living areas. Her pronouncements on how we should live, what we should do, became more frequent, more insistent. Toby, my charming Toby, began to defer to her. "Mother knows best," he'd say with a shrug, avoiding my eyes. The gaslighting was the worst. I remembered one evening, early on, when Clara had openly criticized a business decision I'd made, one that had actually been quite profitable. "A bit reckless, don't you think, dear? Toby needs stability, not gambles." "It wasn't a gamble, Clara," I'd said, trying to keep my voice even. "It was a calculated risk, and it paid off." "Oh, don't be defensive, Jacqueline," she'd replied, her tone pitying. "We just worry about you, about Toby's future." Later, when I'd tried to talk to Toby about it, he'd sighed. "You're overreacting, Jackie. Mum's just old-fashioned. She means well. Why do you always have to take things so personally?" That was their refrain. "You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. You're twisting our words." It was a slow erosion of my confidence, my reality. For a while, I'd even started to believe them. Maybe I was the problem, but the numbers didn't lie. The bank statements, the property deeds, the investment portfolios, they told a different story. A story of my hard work, my prudence, my success. And Mr. Valdez had helped me read that story clearly again. The next morning, while Toby and Clara were still asleep, they usually surfaced around 10, expecting breakfast to be ready. I was on a secure video call with Mr. Valdez. "All the transfer authorizations for the dividend accounts are confirmed, Jacqueline," he said, his image crisp on my laptop screen. "Effective immediately, all passive income will be redirected to your sole private accounts, the ones they are unaware of." "And the joint checking account?" I asked. That was the account my salary went into, the one Toby used for his allowance, and from which Clara often requested funds for her little necessities. "As per our strategy, you've been meticulously documenting your contributions versus his withdrawals. Once you deposit your next paycheck into your new private account, the joint one will effectively contain only what minimal funds he might have contributed over the years, if any. You are within your rights to withdraw your documented contributions." "Which will leave it practically empty," I stated, a grim satisfaction settling in. "Precisely." We went over the final details for the serving of the notices. A registered process server. No room for them to claim they hadn't received them. We confirmed the wording on the notice for Clara as an unauthorized long-term occupant with no tenancy rights. "They will be shocked," Mr. Valdez said, a master of understatement. "They will likely become emotional, perhaps aggressive. Are you prepared?" I thought of Clara's hand on my stomach, Toby's smirk. "More than prepared, Mr. Valdez. I'm ready." "Good. Remember, you have the law, and the truth, on your side." After the call, I made coffee, the aroma filling my kitchen. I looked at the calendar. 5 more days until the notices would be printed, signed by me in Mr. Valdez's office, and handed to the process server. 5 more days of playing the dutiful, slightly downtrodden wife. Every "I love you" Toby had ever uttered now felt like a prelude to a demand. Every gift a down payment on my servitude. His charm was a currency he'd used to buy my compliance, my resources, my life. Clara's concern was a cloak for her manipulations, her desire for control. Mr. Valdez assured me all my ducks were in a row. The only question left was, when would I let them fly? The answer was, very, very soon. And they wouldn't see it coming until the sky fell on their heads. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness, each day a fresh exercise in biting my tongue and stealing my nerves. Toby and Clara, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering just over their horizon, continued their reign of casual tyranny. Clara critiqued my cooking. A little bland tonight, Jacqueline, don't you think? My choice of television programs, must we watch these dreary documentaries? And of course, my continued failure to produce an heir. Toby, as usual, played his supporting role, offering placid agreement to his mother and occasional, patronizing advice to me. You know, Jackie, he said one evening as I was clearing away the dinner plates. They're dinner plates from a meal I'd planned, shopped for and cooked. Mother was talking to Angelina today. Angelina was Toby's aunt, a woman whose primary skill seemed to be stirring pots and spreading gossip. Angelina knows this wonderful fertility specialist. Apparently, she works miracles. Maybe you should consider it. We're not getting any younger. He said it so casually, as if discussing the weather, his eyes already drifting back to the sports highlights on his phone. He didn't see the way my fingers tightened on the edge of the plate, the way my jaw clenched. He didn't see the ice forming in my gaze. The Last Supper, as I'd morbidly dubbed it in my head, was scheduled for Friday night. Clara had insisted on inviting Angelina over. A proper family dinner, she'd declared. We need to discuss some important family matters. I knew what that meant. Another coordinated assault on my reproductive system. Another evening of being lectured and pitied. I almost declined, almost feigned a headache. But then I thought, no. Let them have their moment. Let them gorge on their own arrogance one last time. It would make the coming shock all the more potent, so I played the part. I smiled wanly. I nodded at appropriate intervals. I even managed to look suitably contrite when Clara launched into her familiar speech about a woman's true calling. It's not about careers, Jacqueline, she intoned, her fork gesturing emphatically, narrowly missing a splatter of gravy on my clean tablecloth. It's about legacy, about family, about giving your husband a child to carry on his name. Toby nodded sagely beside her. She's right, you know. A man needs an heir. Angelina, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of pity and relish, chimed in. And you're not getting any younger, dear. My friend's daughter, she waited too long, and now, well, it's just terribly sad. She patted my hand, her touch lingering a moment too long, as if searching for a pulse, or perhaps a flicker of maternal instinct. I focused on a spot just over Clara's shoulder, a small water stain on the ceiling I'd been meaning to fix. I let their words wash over me, a meaningless drone. Inside, I was counting down the hours. Mr. Valdez's office had confirmed. The notices were printed, signed, sealed. Monday morning, the process server would deliver them. I watched them. Clara, puffed up with self-importance. Toby, smug and complacent. Angelina, soaking it all in, no doubt already composing the next chapter of her gossip column. They were so sure of themselves, so secure in their positions, so utterly oblivious to the ground crumbling beneath their feet. I even managed a weak smile when Clara said, "Don't worry, dear, maybe next year we'll have baby news." My smile widened, just a fraction, a secret satisfaction playing at the corners of my lips. Little did she know, the only news arriving next week would be delivered by registered mail, and it wouldn't be about a baby. It would be about an eviction, and the only thing screaming wouldn't be my biological clock, but them. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a painfully beautiful day for the demolition I was about to unleash. I'd taken the day off work, a personal day. I'd told my office. Toby and Clara were, as usual, late risers. I sat in the kitchen, sipping coffee. The silence of the house a stark contrast to the turmoil in my chest. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was a strange, thrumming anticipation, like the moment before starting gunfires. The doorbell rang at precisely 10:30 a.m., just as Mr. Valdez had predicted. I heard the thud of Toby's feet on the stairs, then Clara's sharper, quicker steps from her suite. "I'll get it," Toby called out, his voice still thick with sleep. I remained seated at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around my mug. I could hear the murmur of voices at the front door, Toby's initial confusion, then a note of irritation. "Registered mail? For me? And for Clara Hoffman?" His voice rose in pitch. "What is this?" A moment later, he walked into the kitchen, 2 official-looking envelopes in his hand. Clara trailed behind him, her silk dressing gown flowing, her expression one of regal curiosity. "What is it, Toby?" she asked, peering at the envelopes. "Something from the bank?" Toby tore his open first, his brow furrowed. He scanned the first page, then the second. His face, already pale from sleep, began to lose even more colour. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly agape. "Jacqueline, what is this? Is this some kind of joke?" He tried to laugh, a strangled, unconvincing sound. "A very bad joke." Clara, impatient, snatched her envelope from his unresisting fingers and ripped it open. Her eyes, usually so sharp and critical, widened as she read. The colour drained from her face too, leaving it a mottled, papery white. "Eviction notice?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then, louder, shriller. "Eviction notice. What is the meaning of this, Jacqueline? Have you lost your mind?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "No, Clara," I said, my voice remarkably calm. "I haven't lost my mind. I found it. Those notices are perfectly legal, and they are final. You both have 30 days to vacate the premises." Toby stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Vacate? Jacqueline, this is our home. You can't just kick us out." Clara crumpled onto a kitchen chair, her hand pressed to her chest. "Our home. The home my son provided for you." "Actually, Clara," I said, setting my mug down with a deliberate click, "this has always been my home. I bought it, I paid for it, and it is solely in my name. Toby has been living here as my husband, and you, well, you've been living here as his mother." Toby lunged forward then, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and panic. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. "You can't do this, Jacqueline. This is our home." I pulled my arm away, a cold disgust washing over me. "No, Toby," I said, my voice as hard as the granite countertops. "It was always my home, and your time here is up." His face went from red to a ghastly white. Clara started to wail, a high-pitched, theatrical sound. This was just the beginning, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that they wouldn't go quietly. The initial shockwave of the eviction notices quickly morphed into a predictable storm of manipulation and outrage. Toby, after his initial white-faced horror, swung wildly between desperate apologies and outright threats. "Jackie, baby, please," he'd plead, trying to take my hands, his eyes wide and earnest, in a way I hadn't seen since our earliest days. "We can work this out. I know I haven't been the best husband lately, but I love you. We can go to counseling. We can do anything you want." When I didn't melt, when I simply reiterated that the decision was final, his tone would shift. "You're really going to do this? After everything? What will people think, Jacqueline? Our friends? Our family? You'll be a laughingstock, throwing your husband out on the street." "My true friends will understand, Toby," I replied, my voice even. "And frankly, I stopped caring what people think a long time ago, mostly thanks to you and your mother. Clara, meanwhile, launched her own offensive. Her wails of disbelief turned into a full-blown campaign to paint me as a cruel, unhinged shrew. Her phone became practically glued to her ear. "Angelina, you won't believe what she's done!" I heard her screeching from her room, the door pointedly left ajar. "Thrown us out. After all we've done for her. She's clearly had some sort of breakdown. You must tell everyone." Poor Toby. He's devastated. I half expected a delegation of concerned, gossiping relatives to appear on my doorstep. To preempt any further drama within the house, and to make a very clear point, I waited until they both left one afternoon, Toby to clear his head and Clara to undoubtedly rally more troops, and called a locksmith. The new deadbolts and reinforced locks gleamed with a satisfying finality. When they returned, their keys no longer worked. Toby rattled the doorknob, then banged his fist against the wood. "Jacqueline! Open this door! What the hell is this?" I opened it a crack, the security chain still in place. "I've changed the locks, Toby. For my peace of mind, you'll be given supervised access to collect your belongings at an agreed-upon time." His face was puce. "Supervised access? To my own home?" "It's not your home anymore, Toby." The notice was clear. It was during one of these increasingly fraught confrontations, with Clara hovering in the background muttering about my wickedness, that Toby's carefully constructed facade finally shattered, revealing something far uglier beneath. "You can't just lock me out!" Toby yelled, his voice cracking. He rattled the doorknob again, a useless, angry gesture. "I live here. This is my stuff is in there. And you'll get your stuff, Toby," I said, my voice calm through the small gap allowed by the security chain. "As I said, at an agreed-upon time, with supervision." Clara, who had been hovering behind him like a malevolent shadow, pushed forward. "Jacqueline, this is inhuman. He's your husband. You're treating him like a criminal." "Am I, Clara?" I met her furious gaze. "Or am I finally treating myself like someone who deserves peace in her own home?" Toby backed away from the door, running his hands through his hair. He looked genuinely panicked now, the entitled anger giving way to a raw animal fear. Okay, Jackie. Look, I get it. You're angry. You have every right to be. I messed up. We messed up." He shot a quick, almost accusatory glance at his mother, who huffed. "But this is too much. You're destroying everything." "What exactly am I destroying, Toby?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Our blissful marriage? Your mother's retirement plan?" He flinched. "Don't be like that. I'm talking about our future. My future. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? You know I don't have... everything's tied up with you, with this house." "An unfortunate oversight on your part, perhaps," I said. "But not my problem to solve anymore." "Not your problem?" He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Of course it's your problem. You're my wife. You're supposed to support me, not financially castrate me." The phrase hung in the air, ugly and revealing. Clara gasped, a theatrical hand flying to her mouth, but her eyes were sharp, watching my reaction. "Financially castrate you?" I repeated slowly, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Is that what this is about, Toby? Not just the lack of an heir, but the lack of access to my money if there's no child to secure your legacy?" His face went crimson. He opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly realizing he'd said too much. He looked trapped. "No, that's not... I just mean, a man is supposed to provide, and you've always had everything, and you've always had access to it," I finished for him. "The cars, the holidays, the generous allowance from our joint account that was funded almost entirely by my salary." the comfortable life in my house, with no mortgage payments or property taxes to worry your pretty little head about. I contributed, he sputtered. I managed the household finances. You mean you spent my money, I corrected. And now that the tap is being turned off, you're panicking. Clara chose that moment to intervene, her voice dripping with venom. How dare you speak to my son that way? After all he's given up for you. He could have married anyone. Someone who would have appreciated him, given him a proper family. Given him a blank check, you mean? I shot back, my gaze fixed on Toby. He wasn't just counting on an heir to carry on the Hoffman name, was he? He was counting on an heir to ensure continued access to my assets. An heir would have tied me to him, to you both, indefinitely. An heir would have been his insurance policy. Toby looked like I'd slapped him. He deflated, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a sullen, resentful understanding that I finally saw him for what he truly was. A parasite. You always resented my success, didn't you? I pressed. The years of subtle digs, of undermining comments, suddenly making perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't just about me not being a proper wife. It was about control. My money gave me independence, and you couldn't stand that. A baby, your baby, would have been your leverage. He didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Clara, however, was far from defeated. You twisted, ungrateful girl, she shrieked, her face contorted with rage. You're trying to destroy him. He loves you. And this is how you repay him? By throwing him out like trash? By accusing him of these horrible things? Are they horrible, Clara? I asked, my voice like ice. Or are they just true? Did you know, Toby? Did you know he'd racked up significant personal debts? Debts he clearly expected me, or my failure, to produce an heir who could inherit my money, to eventually cover. Toby's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear, the kind that comes from a hidden secret being dragged into the light. How did you know about that? It doesn't matter how I know, I said. What matters is that I do. And it makes all of this, I gestured vaguely between him and his mother, makes so much more sense. The pressure, the manipulation, the constant focus on my empty womb. It wasn't just about your desire for a grandchild, Clara. It was about securing Toby's financial future, wasn't it? Through me, and through any child I might have. Clara's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For once she seemed genuinely speechless, her carefully constructed image of the concerned mother and mother-in-law shattering around her. Toby just looked broken. You planned this, he whispered, a dawning, horrified understanding in his eyes. You planned all of this. I planned to protect myself, Toby, I said, something I should have done a long time ago. I looked from his defeated face to Clara's stunned one. So, it wasn't just about an heir, was it, Toby? It was about a blank check. My supposed failure was a threat to your little financial fantasy. He looked like I'd slapped him. Clara, finally finding her voice, started wailing, a theatrical, piercing sound. She's destroying my son, my poor boy. What did he ever do to deserve such cruelty? The performance was almost enough to make me laugh. Almost. Clara's wails were a soundtrack to the next few days. They were theatrical, designed for maximum impact, and usually timed for when I was within earshot, or when she was on the phone, presumably regaling Angelina or some other unfortunate soul with tales of my monstrous behavior. Toby, on the other hand, retreated into a sullen silence, punctuated by occasional desperate attempts to reason with me, which quickly devolved into bitter accusations when he realized I wasn't budging. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He snarled one morning, finding me calmly drinking coffee in the kitchen while he paced like a caged animal. He hadn't slept in the house since I'd changed the locks, opting instead for a friend's sofa. Peyton, I think he'd said, though I doubted Peyton was getting the full, unvarnished truth. "Enjoying what, Toby?" I asked, not looking up from my newspaper. "The peace and quiet?" "Yes, immensely." "Don't be sarcastic, Jacqueline. You know what I mean. You're enjoying watching us suffer." "I'm not watching you do anything, Toby. I'm simply reclaiming what's mine. Your suffering, as you call it, is a consequence of your own actions, and frankly, your mother's." He scoffed. "My mother? What did she ever do but love you, try to guide you?" I finally lowered the paper and met his gaze. "Your mother systematically undermined me for a decade, Toby. She treated me like an incubator, a disappointment, and a walking bank account. And you stood by and let her. No, you encouraged her." He had no answer to that, just a tightening of his jaw. The eviction deadline was looming, just over 2 weeks left, and their desperation was becoming palpable. Clara, realizing her phone campaign wasn't yielding the desired results, no angry mob had stormed my gates, no family intervention had been staged, escalated her tactics. She started by refusing to pack. Her belongings remained exactly where they were, a silent, stubborn protest. Then came the dramatic sighs, the strategically placed coughs, the clutching of her chest whenever I entered a room. I ignored it all, continuing with my routine, my calm a stark contrast to her escalating theatrics. One afternoon, I came home from a meeting with Mr. Valdez. We were preparing for potential last-minute legal challenges, though he doubted they had a leg to stand on, to find Clara sprawled at the bottom of the main staircase. "Mother!" Toby, who must have just arrived, was kneeling beside her, his face a mask of panic. "What happened? Are you okay?" Clara moaned, a low, pitiful sound. "My leg. I think it's broken. I fell. The stress. Jacqueline, this stress you're putting us under. It's too much for an old woman." Her eyes, when they flickered towards me, held a glint of triumph. I didn't rush to her side. I didn't gasp in horror. I simply pulled out my phone. "Don't move, Clara. Toby, step back. I'm calling an ambulance." "An ambulance?" Toby looked up, surprised. "Maybe we should just help her to the sofa." "No," I said firmly. "If she's fallen and potentially broken something, moving her is the worst thing we could do. We need professionals." Clara's moans intensified. "Oh, the pain. Jacqueline, how could you be so cold?" I ignored her, calmly speaking to the emergency dispatcher, giving our address and a brief description of the situation. Mr. Valdez had warned me about this exact tactic. "Desperate people do desperate things, Jacqueline," he'd said. "Faking an injury to delay eviction or garner sympathy is a classic. Document everything. Call official channels." While we waited, Toby fussed over Clara, shooting me accusatory glances. "She could be seriously hurt, Jacqueline. And all you can do is stand there. I'm ensuring she gets proper medical attention, Toby. What would you prefer I do? Risk further injury by trying to move her myself?" The paramedics arrived quickly, their calm professionalism a welcome antidote to Clara's histrionics. They gently examined her, asking questions, their faces impassive. Clara put on a brave performance, wincing and groaning at every touch, describing her agonizing pain in vivid detail. "I just felt so dizzy," she explained, her voice weak. "All this worry about where we'll go, what will become of us. It's all Jacqueline's doing." One of the paramedics, a kind-faced woman, palpated Clara's leg carefully. "Can you tell me where it hurts most, ma'am?" Clara pointed vaguely to her shin. "All of it. It's throbbing." After a thorough examination, including checking her range of motion and vital signs, the paramedics exchanged a subtle glance. The kind-faced one straightened up. "Ma'am," she said, her voice gentle but firm, addressing Clara directly. "Your vitals are perfectly stable. There's no visible swelling or deformity in your leg, and you have full range of motion, even if it's a bit tender to the touch. I don't believe anything is broken." Clara's face crumpled. Not in pain, but in the dawning, public horror of being caught in a blatant lie. Her eyes darted from the paramedic to me, then to Toby, who looked utterly bewildered, then increasingly mortified. But I fell," Clara stammered, her voice losing its frail quaver. "I felt a sharp pain." "You might have twisted it slightly, or bruised it," the paramedic conceded. "But it doesn't appear to be a serious injury requiring emergency transport. We'd recommend you see your own doctor if the pain persists." She then turned to me. "Will she be all right here?" "She will be," I said, my voice neutral. "Thank you for coming so quickly." As the paramedics packed up their equipment and left, a heavy silence descended. Toby stared at his mother, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning shame. Clara refused to meet his eyes, or mine. She looked small, deflated, her grand performance exposed as a cheap charade. Their last card, the one played with such dramatic flair, had just been declined, and the eviction date loomed ever closer. The air in the house grew heavier, thick with unspoken accusations and the bitter taste of their desperation. The failed fall seemed to take the last bit of fight out of Clara, at least for a while. She retreated into a sulky silence, spending most of her time in her room, the door firmly closed. The dramatic wails ceased, replaced by an atmosphere of resentful capitulation. Toby, however, seemed to oscillate between a kind of bewildered despair and flashes of his old manipulative charm, as if hoping one last plea might change my mind. "Jackie, can we just talk?" he asked one evening, a few days before the eviction deadline. He'd been let in to pack some personal items under my watchful eye. He sat on the edge of what used to be our bed, surrounded by half-filled boxes. No fighting, no blaming. Just talk. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What is there to talk about, Toby? The court order is clear. You have until Friday." I know, he sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "But this is my life you're dismantling. Our life. Our life, Toby, was built on a foundation of lies and your family's entitlement. I'm just clearing away the debris." He winced. "Okay, maybe I deserved that. Maybe we deserved some of it. But all of it? Are you really going to leave me with nothing?" "Nothing?" I raised an eyebrow. "You have your clothes, your personal effects. You have your... well, whatever you had before you met me." His eyes flashed with a familiar resentment. "You know I put everything into this marriage, into us." "Did you, Toby? Or did you just comfortably settle into my life, my house, my finances, and assume it would last forever, no matter how badly you and your mother treated me?" He looked away, fiddling with a cufflink he'd pulled from a box. I don't understand why you're being so ruthless about it. The money, Jackie. You're really going to strip me bare?" And there it was again. The money. Always the money. "Let's be very clear, Toby," I said, my voice cold. "The money you're referring to is my money. Money I earned. Money I inherited. Money I invested wisely, long before you were in the picture. The fact that you benefited from it for a decade was a privilege, not a right. And that privilege has been revoked." He stood up, pacing the small space between the bed and the boxes. "But the joint accounts, you can't just empty them. That's theft." "Actually, it's not," I replied calmly. "Mr. Valdez and I have been very meticulous. Every penny I contributed to those accounts has been documented. Every penny I withdrew is accounted for. What's left is, shall we say, reflective of your own contributions over the years." I paused, letting that sink in. which, as you know, amounts to very little. His face paled. He knew. He knew his own financial input into our shared life had been negligible, often non-existent. His management of the household finances had mostly involved spending my income. So, all those years I supported your career, he began, his voice rising. All the sacrifices I made. Sacrifices? I cut him off, a humorless laugh escaping me. What sacrifices, Toby? Did you sacrifice your high-powered job? Oh, wait, you didn't have one. Did you sacrifice your own ambitions to support mine? Or did you just enjoy the fruits of my labor while complaining I wasn't home enough to cater to your needs and your mother's demands? He stopped pacing, his fists clenched. You know, I had opportunities. Before you. I could have what, Toby? Found another successful woman to leech off of? The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and brutal. He recoiled as if struck. That's not fair, Jacqueline. Isn't it? Think about it. Your debts, the ones you so conveniently forgot to mention to me, how are you planning to pay those off? Was I supposed to be your bailout plan? Was our non-existent child supposed to be the key to unlocking more of my funds? He stared at me, his eyes wide, a cornered animal. The truth of it, the raw, unvarnished truth of his parasitic existence, was laid bare between us. And what about the little distraction you had last year? I added, playing a card I'd been holding on to, a piece of information Desiree had reluctantly passed on from a mutual acquaintance. The one you thought I didn't know about? Was she part of your grand plan too? Or just a way to spend more of my money while complaining about how unfulfilled you were in our marriage? His jaw dropped. The color drained completely from his face, leaving it a sickly gray. Who told you? Does it matter? It just adds another layer to the deceit, doesn't it, Toby? Another reason why this, I gestured around the room, at the boxes, at the remnants of our shared life, is not just necessary, but long overdue. He sank back onto the bed, defeated. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow understanding of just how thoroughly I had outmaneuvered him, how completely I had seen through his charade. Clara, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, appeared in the doorway. She'd clearly been listening. Her face was a mask of fury, but also a strange, dawning fear. She looked from Toby's devastated face to mine, her eyes narrowed. You knew all this? She whispered, her voice raspy. You knew about his troubles? I know a lot of things, Clara, I said, my gaze unwavering. Things you both thought I was too stupid or too browbeaten to ever figure out. The movers I'd hired were due the next morning. Mr. Valdez had arranged for a small, cheap storage unit, 1 month prepaid. Just enough to get their things out of my house. Their expressions, as they finally seemed to grasp the full extent of their impending financial and domestic annihilation, were a study in disbelief. The comfortable world they had built for themselves, on my foundation, was about to come crashing down. And I would be the one to push the plunger. Eviction day arrived with the kind of grey, drizzly sky that perfectly matched the mood inside the house, at least their mood. Mine was one of grim, resolute anticipation. The movers, a team of 3 burly men in matching blue overalls, rang the doorbell at precisely 9 a.m. I'd already had my coffee, and Mr. Valdez was on speed dial, though I hoped his intervention wouldn't be necessary. Toby answered the door, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. He looked like he hadn't slept. Clara stood behind him, a tragic empress surveying the sack of her kingdom, her arms crossed tightly, her lips a thin, furious line. They're here, Toby said unnecessarily, his voice flat. Yes, they are, I replied, stepping forward. Good morning, gentlemen. Please come in. The items to be moved are clearly marked. I'd spent the previous evening going through the house, tagging everything that belonged to Toby and Clara, with bright yellow stickers. There was surprisingly little that was unequivocally theirs, aside from clothes and personal knickknacks. Most of the furniture, the artwork, the appliances, they were mine. The movers, professional and efficient, got to work immediately. The sight of her cherished porcelain figurines being carefully wrapped in bubble wrap and placed in a box seemed to finally galvanize Clara. "You can't take those!" she shrieked, lunging for a box. "My mother gave me that shepherdess." One of the movers, a large man with a patient expression, gently intercepted her. "Ma'am, if it's got a yellow sticker, it goes. Orders." "But it's mine," Clara insisted, her voice rising. "This is theft, outright thievery." "Clara," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. "Those figurines were a gift to me, from you, for our 5th anniversary. Do you not recall? You said they would look lovely on my mantelpiece." Which they had, until she'd decided the mantelpiece was a better showcase for her own collection of silver-framed photographs of Toby as a child. She stared at me, momentarily speechless, then her face contorted. "You are a vindictive, cold-hearted—" "Save it, Clara," I said wearily. "The movers have a schedule." As their belongings were systematically removed from the rooms they had occupied for so long, the house began to feel lighter, airier. It was as if a physical weight was being lifted. Toby watched in silence, his shoulders slumped, occasionally directing the movers to a specific item of his with a defeated sigh. Then came the moment for the financial coup de grace. I'd waited for this. As the last few boxes were being carried out, I approached Toby and Clara, who were huddled near the front door like refugees. "Before you leave," I said, holding out a sheaf of papers, "I think you should see these." Toby took them reluctantly. Clara peered over his shoulder. They were bank statements, investment summaries, trust fund reports, all solely in my name, all meticulously organized by Mr. Valdez. Accounts they had never known existed. Wealth they had never suspected I possessed, beyond the comfortable lifestyle I provided. What is all this?" Toby stammered, his eyes scanning the figures, growing wider with each page. "That, Toby," I said, "is my financial portfolio. The one I built before I met you. The one that has been quietly growing, independent of you, for many years. The one that funded this house, our vacations, your allowance, and your mother's extended, all-expenses-paid stay." Clara snatched a page from Toby's hand, her eyes darting across the numbers. A choked sound escaped her. This can't be right. This much?" "Oh, it's right," I assured them. "And as of last week, the passive income you both so enjoyed, the dividends, the rental payments that mysteriously appeared in the joint account, has been redirected to my private accounts, the ones you see listed there." Toby looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "So, the joint account, it's really empty?" I finished for him. "Or near enough, containing only the paltry sums you occasionally deposited from your freelance projects, was it?" His attempts at earning his own money had always been sporadic and largely unsuccessful. "But my debts," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was counting on— You thought I'd bail you out?" I shook my head. "Or that our non-existent child would inherit enough to cover your mistakes. Bad planning, Toby. Very bad planning." I paused, then delivered the final blow. "And as for the small gambling problem you developed last year, the one you thought I wouldn't discover, consider any remaining funds in that joint account a very small and entirely insufficient contribution towards settling those particular obligations. You're on your own with the rest." His face crumpled. He looked utterly destroyed. Clara swayed, and for a moment I thought she might actually faint this time. The movers were now waiting by their truck, the last of the boxes loaded. The storage unit is prepaid for 1 month, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It's a 10 by 10. Should be ample space for this. I gestured to the meager pile of their possessions on the curb, looking small and insignificant against the backdrop of my large, now blessedly empty house. Consider this your severance package, I told them, my voice ringing with a finality that echoed in the sudden quiet. For years of service in trying to break my spirit, you failed. I stepped back inside and closed the front door. The click of the lock was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I leaned against it, a wave of exhaustion and elation washing over me. The silence in the house was profound, beautiful. But I knew, even then, that the echoes of their ruin were just beginning. They had built their comfortable cage around me, and I had just handed them the keys to their own, much smaller, much bleaker one. The silence that followed their departure was a physical presence. It settled into the corners of the rooms, draped itself over the furniture that remained, my furniture, and filled the spaces where their voices, their demands, their constant grating presence had been. For the first hour, I just walked from room to room, touching things, breathing deeply. It felt like my house was breathing again too, sighing in relief. I opened windows, letting the cool, damp air chase out the stale energy of their occupation. The scent of rain and wet earth filled the living room, a clean, honest smell. Clara's cloying perfumes and Toby's musky cologne were finally fading. Desiree called around noon. "Well," she demanded, no preamble. "Are the vultures airborne? Has the nest been fumigated?" I laughed, a real, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the newly empty hallway. "The vultures have flown, Des, or rather, been gently but firmly nudged out of the nest and into a rather cramped, prepaid cage. Details. I need glorious, gory details." "So," I told her. I described the movers, Clara's sputtering outrage over the porcelain shepherdess, Toby's dawning horror as he realized the true extent of his financial ruin. I recounted the presentation of the bank statements, the revelation of the redirected income, the final crushing mention of his gambling debts and the affair. Desiree listened, interjecting with appropriate gasps, snorts of derision, and occasional cheers. "Oh, honey, that's not just revenge, that's a masterpiece, a symphony of karmic retribution. Severance package, I'm dying. You actually said that?" "I did," I admitted, a smile playing on my lips. It felt appropriate. Appropriate. It was epic. So, what now? Champagne? A ceremonial burning of their remaining possessions? Please say yes to the burning. I'll bring marshmallows. "Champagne, definitely," I said. "Burning, tempting, but I think the sight of their stuff crammed into that tiny storage unit is punishment enough for now." Later that day, after a long hot bath in my tub, undisturbed, I wandered into what had been Clara's suite. It was bare, stripped of her fussy lace and overstuffed cushions. The only thing left was a faint indentation on the carpet, where her vanity table had stood for years, a ghost of her presence. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even pity, just a profound sense of space. The next few weeks were a blur of reclaiming. I rearranged furniture. I bought new linens in colours I liked. I filled the house with flowers, roses, thorns, and all. I played my music, loud. I cooked what I wanted, when I wanted, or ordered takeout and ate it straight from the carton on my sofa, something Clara would have had a conniption over. The calls started trickling in after about a week. First, a hesitant Peyton, Toby's friend. "Jacqueline, it's Peyton. Listen, Toby's in a bit of a state. He's been crashing on my couch and, well, he's not taking things well." "I imagine not," I said calmly. "Yeah. Look, I'm not taking sides, but he's saying some pretty wild stuff. About you taking all his money, throwing him out with nothing. Peyton, I interrupted. Did Toby ever mention to you the significant personal debts he was hiding? Or the fact that the house and most of the assets he enjoyed were mine long before he came along? Or his little gambling habit? There was a pause on the other end of the line. No. No, he didn't mention any of that. Then perhaps you're not getting the full story, I said. Toby is facing the consequences of his own choices. I wish him well in dealing with them. From a distance, Peyton sounded subdued after that. Right. Okay. Well, take care, Jacqueline. He clearly wanted no part of the drama once he sensed Toby wasn't the innocent victim he was portraying. Then Angelina called, her voice oozing false sympathy. Jacqueline, dear, I was so shocked to hear. Clara is beside herself. They're staying in that dreadful little bedsit Toby found. Can you imagine? After the comfort they were used to. It's just heartbreaking. Is it, Angelina? I asked, my voice cool. Or is it simply the natural outcome when one lives beyond one's means, entirely at someone else's expense for years on end, while offering nothing but criticism and demands in return? Angelina sputtered, clearly not expecting such a direct response. Well, there's no need to be so harsh. Family should support each other. Family should also respect each other, Angelina. And Toby and Clara forgot that lesson a long time ago. They are no longer my concern. I hung up before she could launch into another tirade. The grapevine, I knew, would do its work. The narrative they were trying to spin, of the cruel, ungrateful wife, was already crumbling under the weight of uncomfortable truths. Desiree, my ever-loyal informant, kept me updated with gleeful reports. Heard from a friend, she'd say. Toby tried to hit up old man Henderson for a loan, got laughed out of his office. Apparently, word of his financial restructuring is getting around. Or Clara was seen at the discount grocery store, looking rather less regal without her charge accounts, I hear. Each snippet of news was a small, satisfying affirmation. It wasn't just about the revenge, though I couldn't deny the cold, hard satisfaction of that. It was about justice. It was about the world righting itself, the scales rebalancing. They had taken so much from me, my peace, my confidence, years of my life. Now, they were paying the price. The comments about my empty womb, which used to cut me to the core, now felt like distant echoes from a battle I had already won. My life wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities, full of peace, full of my choices. I had my home, my career, my friends. I had myself back, and that was more than enough. They wanted an heir to secure their future in my house, with my money. Instead, they inherited the consequences of their own cruelty. And me? I inherited my life back, every square inch of it. The house settled around me like a comfortable old coat, finally fitting just right. The lingering scent of Clara's disapproval and Toby's entitlement had been completely exorcised, replaced by the aroma of fresh paint in the spare room, soon to be my new home office, and the lemon polish I used on my grandmother's antique sideboard. Desiree came over a few weeks after the eviction, armed with a bottle of ridiculously expensive champagne and a wicked grin. To Jacqueline, she toasted, clinking her glass against mine. Queen of her castle, architect of her own peace, and master of the most satisfying karmic takedown I've ever witnessed. I laughed, taking a sip. The champagne fizzed on my tongue, a taste of victory. It wasn't about being a queen, Des. It was just about not being a prisoner anymore. Well, you've certainly sprung yourself in style, she said, settling onto my sofa. The one Clara used to complain was too modern. So, what's the latest from the former inmates? Peyton called again, actually, I said, swirling the champagne in my glass. Sounded rather sheepish. Apparently, Toby's charm is wearing thin now that he's permanently on Peyton's couch and contributing nothing but complaints and demands for sympathy. Shocking, Desiree deadpanned. You mean his winning personality isn't enough to sustain him without your bank account attached? It seems not. Peyton mentioned Toby tried to get him to co-sign a loan. Peyton, wisely, declined. Said something about Toby needing to learn to stand on his own 2 feet for a change. Desiree howled with laughter. Oh, the irony. The man who spent a decade propped up by you is now being told to find his own footing. Beautiful. And Clara? She pressed, her eyes gleaming. Angelina, despite my best efforts to discourage her, still calls occasionally, I admitted. Mostly to lament Clara's fall from grace. Apparently their dreadful little bedsit is even more dreadful than initially reported. Thin walls, noisy neighbours, and a distinct lack of anyone willing to cater to Clara's every whim. You don't say. Angelina also let slip that Clara tried to organise a support committee among her old friends. It, didn't gain much traction. Seems her social standing took a rather significant hit once the truth about their financial situation and their treatment of me started to circulate. Funny how quickly fair-weather friends disappear when the forecast changes, isn't it? Desiree topped up our glasses. So, they're miserable, broke, and socially ostracized. Sounds like karma delivered, with a little meticulous planning from a certain someone. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. It does feel... I won't lie, Des. There's a part of me that feels a cold, hard satisfaction in knowing they're experiencing even a fraction of the misery they put me through. Don't you dare feel guilty about that, Jacqueline, Desiree said fiercely. You endured years of their abuse. You gave them chance after chance. They made their bed, and now they're lying in it. A lumpy, uncomfortable, budget-rate bed, from the sounds of it. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun streaming through the newly cleaned windows. The house felt calm, truly calm, for the first time in memory. You know, I said thoughtfully, all those years, they made me feel like my life was incomplete because I didn't have a child, that my empty womb, as Clara so delicately put it, was my greatest failure. And now, Desiree prompted gently. And now, I said, looking around at my beautiful, peaceful home, I realize my life isn't empty at all. It was just cluttered. Cluttered with their expectations, their demands, their negativity. Now that the clutter is gone, I took a deep breath. Now there's room for me, for what I want. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find a delivery man holding a large, extravagant bouquet of flowers. Bright, vibrant, a riot of colour. Jacqueline? He asked. I nodded. These are for you. There was no card. Desiree peered over my shoulder as I brought them in. Wow, secret admirer? I buried my face in the blooms, inhaling their fresh scent. I don't think so. I had a suspicion. Perhaps a peace offering from a chastened Peyton, or even, less likely, a misguided attempt at reconciliation from someone else. Or maybe, just maybe, they were from me. To me. A celebration. It didn't really matter who sent them. What mattered was the feeling they evoked. Not obligation, not a reminder of some perceived failing, but simple, uncomplicated beauty. They wanted an heir to secure their future in my house. With my money, I said, arranging the flowers in a vase. My vase. Instead, they inherited the consequences of their own cruelty. And me? I smiled at Desiree, a smile that reached my eyes and warmed me from the inside out. I inherited my life back, every square inch of it, and it's looking pretty damn good. The future stretched before me, open and bright, no longer overshadowed by their demands or defined by their narrative. I was the author of my own story now, and I couldn't wait to write the next chapter.
The velvet curtains in the foundation's back office always smelled like old money and quiet desperation. I'd spent countless hours here, methodically building spreadsheets while my mother and sister collected accolades for transforming our city's art scene. Today, the familiar scent made my stomach turn. "Darling, your live stream auction concept is inspired," my mother said, not looking up from her tablet. "But it needs that special something to really capture attention." She tapped her manicured nails against the mahogany conference table, a rhythm that had haunted my childhood. Kayla lounged in her chair, already dressed for tonight's gallery opening. "Mom's right, Abby. Nobody cares about boring corporate sponsorships anymore. We need something personal, something that'll get people talking." I should have seen it coming. The way they exchanged glances, how Reagan, our PR specialist, wouldn't meet my eyes. The foundation's boardroom suddenly felt airless, despite the soaring ceilings. "We're going to auction your wedding date," my mother announced. "The highest bidder gets to choose when you and Ethan tie the knot. Think of the publicity. Love for the Arts Foundation heiress puts marriage in public's hands." Ethan's hand found mine under the table, squeezing tight. I focused on his touch, warm and steady, while bile crept up my throat. "The streaming numbers will be incredible," Kayla gushed. "We can do reaction videos, behind-the-scenes content, maybe even a countdown show." I started, but Mother cut me off with a wave. "It's perfect, really. You've always been so private. This will help you connect with our donor base." The way she said private made it sound like a character flaw. "Besides, you haven't set a date yet, have you?" "We were thinking spring," Ethan said quietly. His grip tightened, and I knew he was remembering our real plans. The small ceremony we'd discussed, just us and a few close friends. Reagan cleared her throat. "The legal team can draw up the necessary contracts. We'll need to move quickly to announce before the Harrison Foundation's benefit next month." "Wonderful," Mother said. "Kayla, you'll handle the media rollout. Abigail, make sure all the technical details for the stream are sorted. We can't have any glitches." I nodded mechanically, watching my sister pull up her contacts list. She was already texting influencers, her face glowing with excitement. The same face that had beamed at cameras while accepting awards for arts programs I'd developed, taking credit for grants I'd written deep into the night. "Oh, and we'll need to revisit your dress choice," Mother added. "Something more telegenic. The Vera Wang was lovely, but it won't pop on screen." The wedding dress I'd chosen myself, of course. "I'll handle the wine selection for the reception," I heard myself say. My voice sounded distant, controlled. "I know a boutique distributor who's been eager to work with the foundation." Mother barely nodded, already discussing camera angles with Reagan. Only Ethan noticed the slight tremor in my hands as I made a note to contact Brooke about those special labels we'd discussed. "Meeting adjourned," Mother announced, standing. "Kayla, walk with me. We need to discuss your speech for tonight's opening." They swept out together, trailing expensive perfume and self-satisfaction. Reagan followed, tablet clutched to her chest like armor. When the door clicked shut, Ethan turned to me. "We don't have to do this." I touched the delicate pendant at my throat, the one piece of jewelry I owned that hadn't been chosen by my mother. "Yes, we do." I met his eyes, but not the way they expect. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Nash?" "I'll call him tonight. And Brooke?" I stood, smoothing my skirt. "They want to make a spectacle of my wedding? Fine. But they're going to learn that not everything that looks pristine on the surface stays that way once you uncork it." The velvet curtains whispered as we left, their familiar musty scent now tinged with something else, something that smelled like revenge. Kayla's laughter ricocheted off the foundation's marble floors, a sound like breaking crystal. She was holding court near the massive peony arrangements, their cloying sweetness making my head swim. A cluster of society wives hung on her every word. Can you believe it? My little sister finally stepping into the spotlight. She caught my eye across the lobby and raised her champagne flute. To Abigail, who's making the ultimate sacrifice for the arts. The responding titters made my skin crawl. I clutched my tablet tighter and slipped out the side entrance, texting Nash that I was running 5 minutes late. The cafe was 3 blocks away, far enough from the Foundation's usual haunts that I could breathe easier. Nash sat in a corner booth, 2 espressos waiting. He stood when I approached, his smile nothing like the ingratiating ones I'd grown up watching. You look like you could use this, he said, sliding 1 cup toward me as I sat. I took a scalding sip, letting the bitterness ground me. Thanks for meeting on such short notice. When the daughter of the woman who publicly rejected my firm's proposal calls, I make time. He leaned back, studying me, though I admit I'm curious about the urgency. You remember the rejection meeting? The espresso burned my tongue, but I welcomed the pain. When my mother said your vision was too, what was the word? Provincial, Nash supplied. Right before your sister suggested I focus on community theater instead of real arts funding. I set down my cup. What if I told you I could help you acquire controlling interest in the Foundation's endowment fund? His eyebrows rose slightly. I'd say that sounds impossible, given the board structure. The auction, I said. My wedding date auction. The proceeds will be substantial. Mother's already fielding calls from half the city's elite, but the money needs to flow through a separate entity for tax purposes. Understanding dawned in his eyes. A shell corporation, one that you own, but with me as the visible director. I pulled out my tablet, showing him the Foundation's financial projections. The auction funds would give your firm significant leverage, especially once certain irregularities in the Foundation's past dealings come to light. Nash's fingers drummed once on the table. Irregularities your mother and sister don't know you know about? Amazing what you can find when you're the only one who actually reads the quarterly reports. I swiped to another screen. There's more. The auction reception will feature an exclusive wine label. The bottles will have QR codes that appear decorative but actually link to a secure server. Containing? Everything. Grant misappropriations, manipulated artist selections, kickbacks from certain galleries. I met his gaze. Enough to end their monopoly on this city's art scene. He studied me for a long moment. Why now? Because I'm tired of watching them take credit for my work while treating me like a prop. The words came out sharper than intended. Because they think they can auction off my wedding date like it's another piece of art for their collection. And your fiancé? Ethan's with me. He's seen how they operate. I finished my espresso, the bitterness lingering. They've undermined him at every turn, suggested he's not cultured enough for the family. Nash pulled out his phone, typed briefly. I'm sending you secure contact details for my legal team. We'll need to move fast to set up the corporation before the auction announcement. I can have the documentation ready by tomorrow. Your mother and sister, they really have no idea you're capable of this, do they? I thought of Kayla's tinkling laugh, my mother's dismissive waves. They see what they want to see, the quiet daughter, the reliable one who handles the boring details. Their mistake. Nash stood straightening his jacket. I'll have my team draw up the preliminary paperwork. And Abigail? He paused. For what it's worth, I think you're going to make an excellent director. Outside, I could hear distant laughter from the Foundation's direction, where my sister was probably still holding court among the peonies. Let them laugh. Soon they'd learn that some flowers, when crushed, release poison instead of perfume. I pulled out my phone to text Brooke about the wine labels. Everything was falling into place, piece by careful piece. The cellar air hung thick with the earthy scent of aging wine, a stark contrast to the sterile foundation offices above. Brooke moved between the racks with practiced ease, running her fingers along the bottles we'd selected. "Your sister called again," she said, pulling down a 2018 Cabernet. "Wanted to make sure we're using the right vintages for her social media coverage." I snorted, carefully applying another label. "Did you tell her these are all small batch Instagram-worthy selections that'll make her look sophisticated?" "Of course." She ate it up. Brooke set the bottle on our workstation. "Though I still can't believe they're auctioning off your wedding date. That's next level toxic." The label maker hummed, printing another batch of our specially designed stickers. Each one featured an intricate pattern that, when scanned, would lead to a server filled with carefully documented evidence. Years of my family's manipulation laid bare in spreadsheets and emails. "Hold this steady," I said, positioning the next label. The adhesive had to be perfect, no bubbles or creases to suggest tampering. "Reagan's sending the final guest list tomorrow. We'll need at least 300 bottles. Brooke helped me align the label. "And the wax seals?" "Red, like my mother insisted, because apparently everything has to coordinate with the foundation's branding." I reached for the melting pot where the sealing wax bubbled. "But we modified the formula. It'll crack clean when they open the bottles, leaving the QR codes intact." The rich smell of melted wax mixed with the wine cellar's mineral tang as I dipped the first bottle. The seal would look flawless. My mother had taught me the importance of appearances after all. "Your tech guy confirmed the server's secure?" Brooke asked, prepping the next bottle. "Nash's team handled it. Once the story breaks, every financial reporter in the city will have access." The wax dried to a perfect crimson sheen, including proof of how they blocked your distribution company from major contracts. Brooke's hands stilled on the bottle she was holding. "That would change everything for my business." "I know." I set the finished bottle in the rack. "Consider it thanks for helping me change everything for mine." We worked in comfortable silence, the repetitive motion of label, wax, dry, becoming almost meditative. Each bottle was another piece of ammunition, another crack in my family's carefully constructed facade. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Your mother just called. Wants to discuss the wedding menu." I texted back one-handed while sealing another bottle. "Let me guess. She hates our choices? Says they're too pedestrian for the foundation's image. Wants to bring in some celebrity chef." The wax dripped, nearly missing the bottle's neck. I steadied my hand, remembering all the times they dismissed Ethan's common tastes. "Tell her we'll think about it. Need to focus on auction prep right now." "Already did. Love you. Stay strong." Brooke glanced at my phone. "They're really going all out on controlling every detail, huh?" "They can't help themselves." I reached for another bottle. "But they never bothered to learn about wine production or accounting or digital security. Too mundane for them." "Their loss." Brooke held up a finished bottle, examining the seal. "These really are beautiful, you know. No one would ever suspect." I ran my fingers over the smooth wax surface. "That's the point. They taught me well. Everything has to be perfect on the outside." The cellar's climate control hummed, keeping the wines at their ideal temperature. Soon these bottles would be arranged on elegant tables, served to the city's elite while they bid on my wedding date. Each pour would bring us closer to exposure. "Last batch," Brooke said, setting up more bottles. "Want to celebrate with a glass when we're done? I've got a nice Malbec that's definitely not going to the gala." I smiled, reaching for the label maker. "Perfect. Something honest for a change." The wax continued to melt, red as revenge, while we sealed truth into every bottle. Above us, I could imagine my mother and sister planning their grand auction, never suspecting that their undoing would be served in crystal glasses of their own choosing. The gallery hummed with expensive perfume and practiced laughter, crystal stemware catching the candlelight like trapped stars. I watched from near a Monet my mother had acquired last spring, tracking her progress through the crowd. She moved like a shark, all smooth grace and hidden teeth. "Your mother's really outdoing herself," Ethan murmured, sliding his hand to the small of my back. "I counted 3 state senators and a tech billionaire in the last 10 minutes. I leaned into his touch, grateful for its steadying warmth against the gallery's artificial chill. "All here to bid on our future." "To bid on what they think is our future," he corrected softly. Across the room, Kayla twirled for the live stream cameras, her designer gown catching the light. "And here we have the couple of the hour," she trilled, gesturing for us to join her. "My darling sister and her fiancé, whose special day will support the arts in our beautiful city." Ethan's hand pressed slightly firmer against my back as we approached, support and warning in one touch. "How are the viewer numbers?" I asked, perfecting the slight tremor in my voice that they'd expect. "Through the roof," Kayla beamed at the camera. "And the bidding hasn't even started. Speaking of which," she touched her earpiece, "they're ready for us in the main hall." The crowd drifted toward the auction space, crystal glasses clinking like wind chimes. I watched them sample our special vintage, each sip bringing them closer to truth without knowing it. Reagan materialized at my elbow, tablet in hand. "Interesting development," she said quietly. "We've had a last-minute registration from a private investment group. Very substantial preliminary offer." "Oh?" I sipped my Chardonnay, letting its metallic crispness ground me. "Mother must be pleased." "She's intrigued." Reagan's eyes narrowed slightly. "The entity was incorporated quite recently." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed. My mother took the podium, resplendent in midnight blue silk. "Distinguished guests, generous patrons of the arts, welcome to this historic evening." I half listened to her practice speech, watching the auction interface light up on the massive screens. Initial bids started flowing in, 6-figure sums offered casually as cocktail orders. Then Nash's entity entered the fray. "2 million, the automated voice announced. The crowd tittered excitedly. 2.5, countered the tech billionaire. 3 million. Nash's bid landed like a gauntlet. Kayla practically vibrated with glee, working the live stream audience. The tension is incredible, viewers. Who could have imagined such passion for the arts and, of course, for my sister's happiness? I felt Reagan watching me, her professional smile slipping slightly. She'd always been too observant for my family's good. 5 million, Nash's entity declared. The room collectively gasped. Mother's perfectly composed face showed a flicker of something, greed, concern, before smoothing over. "Such generosity," she purred into the microphone. "The foundation is truly blessed." 6 million. The tech billionaire tried again. 8 million. Nash's response was immediate. Reagan touched my arm. "Abigail, that investment group, their bidding pattern seems almost personal." I met her gaze steadily. "Everything about this evening is personal, isn't it? That's what Mother wanted." She started to respond, but Kayla's squeal cut through the tension. 10 million! An anonymous bid of $10 million. The room erupted in excited chatter. I watched my mother's hands tighten on the podium, saw the calculating look in her eyes. All that money flowing through channels she thought she controlled. "Going once," she announced, voice honey sweet. "Going twice." Ethan's hand found mine, squeezing gently. Across the room, Nash raised his wine glass slightly in my direction. Sold. Too bitter number 47 for $10 million. Applause thundered through the gallery. Kayla rushed to embrace me, cameras following her every move. This is incredible. The foundation's biggest single donation ever. Yes, I said, watching my mother direct the staff to open more of our special wine for a celebratory toast. It certainly is. Reagan stood back, frowning at her tablet. Let her suspect. By the time she figured it out, it would be too late. The crystal glasses clinked again, a sound like breaking ice. Soon they'd all see what lay beneath the surface of this perfect evening. The reception area buzzed with post-auction energy, wait staff weaving through clusters of guests with practiced grace. I watched a pastry chef torch the creme brulee, the smell of caramelizing sugar sharp and acrid in the air. My phone vibrated. Brooke, it's happening. Check your socials. Sure enough, phones were out everywhere, guests admiring the wine bottles' artistic labels. Each flash of a camera meant another potential scan, another digital breadcrumb leading to the truth. These labels are gorgeous. A lifestyle influencer gushed nearby, positioning her phone just so. The pattern is so intricate, very on brand for the foundation. If she only knew. My phone buzzed again. Marina from the City Tribune. Need to meet. Have questions about foundation financials. Urgent. I typed back. Tomorrow. Cafe on 4th, 7 a.m. Abigail? My mother's voice cut through the chatter. She stood alone by the dessert station, looking almost human in the soft lighting. Quite an evening. I picked up a spoon, cracking through the crystallized sugar on a creme brulee. $10 million. A record, right? She watched me sample the dessert. Interesting timing. That final bidder. A newly formed investment group, I hear. The custard was too sweet, coating my tongue like guilt. I wouldn't know. I was too busy being auctioned off. Don't be dramatic, darling. This is about the foundation's future. She selected a chocolate-dipped strawberry, examining it like evidence. Though I admit I'm curious about your sudden engagement with our mission. Isn't that what you always wanted? I licked syrup from my fingers, feeling sticky and childish under her gaze. For me to take a more public role? Public, yes, but calculated. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Reagan tells me you've been spending time in the wine cellar with that distributor friend of yours. Brooke, she's helping coordinate the reception wine. Your idea, remember? A waiter approached with fresh glasses of our special vintage. Mother waved him over, studying the bottle as he poured. The wax seal is quite striking. Your suggestion? I thought red would match the foundation's branding. I kept my voice light, remembering years of practice. Kayla agreed it would look better in photos. She sipped, then gestured to the crowd. Your sister certainly knows how to work a room. Look at her. Kayla held court near the string quartet, her laugh carrying over the music as she posed with guests. Phones flashed constantly around her, each one potentially capturing our coded labels. She's always been a natural, I said, the words tasting bitter as burnt sugar. Yes, well. Mother set down her glass. Some of us shine in the spotlight, others. She trailed off, the familiar dismissal hanging between us. My phone buzzed again. Nash. Financial press asking questions tomorrow? I should check on Ethan, I said, already stepping away. Make sure he's handling the attention well. Abigail. Her voice stopped me. You understand what this means for the foundation, don't you? $10 million. We'll be unstoppable. I thought of the QR codes hiding beneath perfect wax seals, of encrypted servers holding years of receipts and emails. Nothing lasts forever, Mother, not even foundations. She frowned, but before she could respond, Kayla's voice rang out. "Mom, the governor's wife wants a photo." I watched her glide away, practiced smile already in place. Nearby, another influencer angled her phone toward a wine bottle, capturing its secrets without knowing. My phone lit up once more. Brooke, server traffic spiking, multiple media outlets accessing files. I moved through the crowd toward Ethan, pausing to crack the sugar on another dessert. The burnt sweetness matched the feeling in my chest, satisfaction tinged with something darker, something that had been caramelizing for years. Tomorrow, the real headlines would begin, but tonight, I watched my family bask in their seeming triumph, their glasses filled with truth they hadn't thought to look for. The string quartet started another piece, slow and inevitable as karma. I caught Nash's eye across the room and gave a slight nod. Everything was falling into place, like sugar crystallizing into glass. The gallery's industrial strength AC raised goosebumps on my arms as I approached the podium. Hundreds of faces turned toward me, bathed in the blue glow of live stream screens. My throat felt like sandpaper. As the subject of tonight's auction, I began, the microphone carrying my voice to viewers worldwide, I want to express my gratitude. In the front row, my mother beamed, probably relieved I was sticking to the script. Kayla bounced on her heels near the main camera, still riding the high of the record-breaking bid. Then I saw the first phone screen light up with a notification, then another and another. A journalist in the third row frowned at her device, then shot a sharp glance at my mother. The whispers started like a slow leak. The foundation has always been about transparency, I continued, watching Reagan's face change as she checked her tablet, about bringing truth to light through art. More phones buzzed. A society photographer lowered his camera, typing frantically. The whispers grew louder, carrying fragments that made Kayla's smile falter. Financial records? Misappropriated grants? Look at these numbers. Reagan pushed through the crowd toward my mother, her professional calm cracking. I kept speaking, my voice steady despite my desert-dry throat. Tonight's auction represents everything the foundation stands for. I met my mother's eyes. Everything hidden beneath beautiful surfaces. Kayla's live stream feed stuttered as comments flooded in. She grabbed her phone, color draining from her face as she scrolled. "What is this?" she hissed at Reagan. "Do something." But Reagan was frozen, staring at her screen. My mother's smile had turned brittle as she noticed the shifting atmosphere, the way donors were suddenly avoiding her gaze. "The winning bid," I said into the microphone, came from Horizon Ventures, a firm whose arts funding proposal this foundation rejected last quarter. Recognition flashed across my mother's face. She stood abruptly, gesturing for the cameras to cut. Too late. Their $10 million, I continued, will be processed through New Dawn Holdings, a corporation registered last week. I paused, letting the implications sink in. Under my directorship. The whispers became a roar. Kayla's perfect mask cracked completely as she read the breaking headlines. Reagan's tablet slipped from her hands, clattering on the marble floor. "You'll find," I said, my voice carrying over the chaos, "that the foundation's financial records are now available to the press, along with emails documenting years of grant manipulation, kickbacks, and strategic suppression of competing arts organizations." "Abigail!" My mother's voice could have frozen flame. "Stop this, now!" "Why?" I gestured to the agitated crowd, their phones glowing like accusatory stars. "Isn't this the spotlight you wanted me in?" Journalists were already pushing forward, questions overlapping. "Is it true about the Harrison grant? What about the gallery kickback scheme? Did you knowingly falsify donor records? Kayla grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. What have you done? Created art, I said softly. Just like you taught me. All about presentation, right? Reagan had finally reached my mother, whispering urgently in her ear, but I could see in her eyes that she knew. Damage control wouldn't work this time. The story was already viral, spreading through the same social networks they'd used to promote the auction. The live stream, my mother snapped. Shut it down. Can't, I said. The feed's being recorded by multiple news outlets. But please keep smiling. Appearances matter, remember? The AC hummed louder, chilling the sweat on my neck as I watched my family's carefully constructed world fracture. Ethan appeared at my side, solid and warm against the artificial cold. Ms. Mills, a reporter pushed forward. Can you explain these documents showing systematic suppression of smaller arts organizations? My mother's mask finally slipped, revealing something ancient and angry beneath. But before she could speak, another wave of notifications swept through the crowd. The wine label story was breaking. If you'll excuse me, I said into the microphone, I need to discuss wedding dates with my fiancé. After all, that's what tonight was about, wasn't it? I stepped down from the podium, leaving chaos in my wake. The live stream cameras captured everything. Kayla's crumbling composure, Reagan's futile damage control, my mother's mask of authority shattering like sugar glass. The foundation's perfect surface had finally cracked, revealing all the rot beneath, and everyone was watching. The final bid notification echoed through the gallery's speakers with a decisive ping. $10 million. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she passed me the microphone, her smile fixed and glassy. Copper flooded my mouth. I'd been biting my cheek without realizing. The crowd's expectant faces blurred before me, phones raised to capture the moment. My heart hammered so hard I was sure the microphone would pick it up. The winning bidder, I said, tasting blood and triumph, is Horizon Ventures. A rustle of confusion swept through the audience. Behind me, Kayla's sharp intake of breath. Some of you may remember them. Their arts funding proposal was rejected by this foundation last quarter. I met Nash's eyes as he stood. They're now partnering with me to launch the Women in Arts Incubator Program. The first wine bottle popped open somewhere in the back. It's cracked like a starting pistol. Then another and another. All around the room, waiters began pouring our special vintage. What is this? My mother's whisper carried despite her best efforts. Abigail, what are you doing? The incubator, I continued, my voice growing stronger, will provide grants and mentorship to female artists and arts administrators, particularly those who've been overlooked by traditional institutions. More bottles opening now. A symphony of small explosions. Phones started buzzing, not just in the room, but across the city, across the country. The QR codes were doing their work. Oh, God, Kayla breathed, staring at her screen. Oh, God, no. Nash stepped forward. Horizon Ventures is proud to announce this partnership. We believe transparency in arts funding is crucial. He paused, letting the word transparency land, which is why we're also releasing a comprehensive review of the Foundation's grant history. The crowd's gasp was immediate, electric. Reagan lunged for her tablet, fingers flying as she tried to contain the damage. But the story was already spreading, carried by every wine bottle in the room. You'll find, I said, that each bottle of tonight's special vintage contains a link to detailed documentation, emails, financial records, evidence of how certain artists were promoted while others were blacklisted. My mother's hand clamped on my arm. Stop this immediately. Why? I turned to face her fully. Isn't this what you wanted? Your quiet daughter finally taking initiative? Journalists were already broadcasting live, their cameras catching the moment my mother's composure finally shattered. The incubator program, I announced, shrugging off her grip, We'll operate with complete financial transparency. Unlike the Foundation's previous creative accounting practices, Kayla's voice cracked. You can't prove anything. Actually, Nash said, his tone pleasant but firm, she can prove everything. The SEC is particularly interested in the Harrison Gallery arrangement. The room erupted. Phones flashed like lightning as society photographers captured my mother's face, Kayla's panic, Reagan's defeat. The images would be everywhere within minutes. I've spent years, I said into the microphone, watching talented women get pushed aside, watching my mother and sister take credit for other people's work, watching them decide who deserves recognition and who doesn't. More bottles opened, each crack another nail in the Foundation's coffin. So, yes, Mother, I turned to her, I finally learned to play the game. I learned about presentation, about timing, about making everything look perfect on the surface, just like you taught me. You've destroyed us, she whispered. No. I handed her the microphone. You did that yourselves. I just uncorked the truth. The live stream camera zoomed in as she staggered back, her perfectly curated world dissolving like sugar in wine. Kayla had collapsed into a chair, mascara smearing as she read headline after headline. Nash raised his glass to new beginnings in the arts community. The crowd, sensing blood in the water, echoed his toast. Phones kept buzzing as the story spread, each notification another crack in my family's facade. Ethan, I called softly. He appeared at my side, warm and solid as always. I think I'm ready to set that wedding date now. Around us, the Foundation's carefully constructed empire crumbled like burnt sugar, leaving nothing but bitter truth and the sharp, clean scent of justice finally served. Rain tapped against the gallery's stained glass, casting watercolor shadows across the chaos below. I stood in the upper mezzanine, swirling the last of our special vintage in my glass. The pepper notes lingered on my tongue, complex and satisfying. Through the window, blue and red lights pulsed silently. The Foundation's board members had called the police, as if fraud investigators weren't already on their way. There she is, a reporter's voice carried from the lobby. Ms. Mills, can you comment on the allegations of systematic grant fraud? My mother's response was lost in the general din, but her body language spoke volumes. Gone was the practiced grace, replaced by something brittle and defensive. Kayla huddled behind her, foam pressed to her ear, probably trying to reach their crisis management team. Quite a vintage, Nash said, joining me at the railing, though I suspect it'll be remembered more for its label than its bouquet. I smiled, watching Reagan try to herd the press away from my family. The Foundation always did care more about packaging than substance. Footsteps on the stairs announced Ethan's arrival. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pressing a kiss to my forehead. His warmth seeped through my dress, steadying me like it had so many times before. The incubator program's website just went live, he murmured, already getting applications. Below, another commotion erupted as federal agents entered through the side door. The sight of my mother's face as they approached made my chest tight, not with guilt, but with something like relief. Ms. Mills, one agent called up to me, we'll need your statement. Of course. I finished my wine, savoring that final peppery note. I've been keeping very detailed records. Kayla's voice suddenly cut through the noise. This is ridiculous. She's just jealous. She's always been jealous of what we built. What you built? I descended the stairs slowly, each click of my heels punctuating my words. You mean what you took, what you claimed, what you stole from every artist and administrator you stepped on. Abigail, my mother's voice cracked, we're your family. No. I reached the bottom step. You're my cautionary tale. The rain drummed harder against the windows as agents began collecting laptops, tablets, phones. Each device held its own evidence, complementing what the wine labels had already revealed. The Women in Arts Incubator Program, I announced to the hovering reporters, will announce its first grant recipients next month. We believe in nurturing talent, not controlling it. Brooke appeared with a fresh bottle of our vintage. For the cameras, she said with a wink. They all want shots of the label now. The foundation's logo caught the light as she turned the bottle, the hidden QR code a subtle shadow beneath the wax seal. My mother watched, her expression crumbling as she finally understood the full scope of my planning. You used everything we taught you against us, she whispered. I learned from the best. I accepted a fresh glass from Brooke. About influence, about timing, about making things look exactly right on the surface. Ethan's hand found mine as the agents approached my mother and sister with papers. Warrants, probably. The sight should have satisfied me more, but instead I felt light, untethered, free. Nash, I called. Let's show them the incubator's mission statement. He nodded, pulling up the website on a tablet. Our logo filled the screen, not a reflection of the foundations, but something entirely new, something honest. The rain painted tears down the stained glass as my mother and sister were led away. Their perfect world dissolved like sugar in wine. Reporters tracked their exit, cameras flashing, but I kept my eyes on the future unfolding on Nash's tablet. When's the wedding? Brooke asked softly. Spring, Ethan answered. Small ceremony, just truth-tellers invited. I leaned into him, breathing in the lingering scent of wine and justice. Through the windows, the city glowed despite the rain, full of artists who would finally have a fair chance. To new beginnings, I said, raising my glass one final time. The remaining crowd, journalists, agents, allies, echoed the toast. Above us, the stained glass transformed the police lights into something almost beautiful, like art emerging from chaos, like truth rising from carefully crafted lies, like me finally writing my own story.
The first time my mother called me a liar, I was 17. I had just thrown up from the pain for the third time that morning, and she stood in the doorway of the bathroom, arms crossed, lips pursed into that familiar line of disappointment. My name is Eleanor, and I've spent the last 12 years of my life being told that my pain isn't real. Get up, she said that morning. You're going to be late for school again. Alexandra is already dressed and eating breakfast. I tried to stand, but my legs shook so badly I had to grip the toilet bowl. Mom, please, something's really wrong. I need to see a doctor. We've been to 4 doctors. They all say you're fine. She sighed, that heavy, theatrical sigh she'd perfected over the years. This attention-seeking has to stop. That was the first day I learned that some kinds of pain go deeper than physical agony. Some kinds of pain live in the space between what you know is true and what everyone tells you isn't. Eleanor, you look terrible, Summer said to me last week, setting down a cup of tea on my desk. She's been my nurse-turned-friend for 3 years now, the only person who's consistently believed me. Have you been sleeping? I shook my head, trying to focus on my laptop screen. Working remotely as a content writer is the only job I can manage these days. The pain was bad last night. Really bad. Did you call your parents? I laughed, but it came out more like a cough. Yeah, right. Dad would just tell me to toughen up again, and Mom would remind me how Alexandra works 60-hour weeks without complaining. Summer sat on the edge of my desk. You need to see Dr. Elliot. He's different from the others. He actually listens. I had heard that before, from other well-meaning friends who eventually gave up on me. But Summer was persistent. She made the appointment herself and drove me there when my hands were shaking too badly to grip the steering wheel. Dr. Elliot didn't look up from my file when I entered his office. He was actually reading, my stack of medical records. Tell me about the pain, he said, still not looking up. Shouldn't you tell me it's all in my head first? I tried to joke. That's usually how these appointments start. He finally met my eyes. I prefer to listen before I make assumptions. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the burning that started in my joints when I was 17, how it spread like wildfire through my body over the years, how some days I couldn't get out of bed, and other days I could almost pretend to be normal. Almost. Your sister, he said, scanning a particular page. Has she shown any symptoms? Alexandra? I nearly laughed again. No, she's perfect. Always has been. Star student, star employee, star daughter. She doesn't have time for mysterious illnesses. Dr. Elliot nodded slowly, making notes. Then he ordered tests. Lots of tests. Tests no other doctor had bothered with because they were too busy suggesting antidepressants or therapy. 3 weeks later, I sat in his office again, clutching the results with trembling hands. It's a rare genetic condition, he explained, pointing to highlighted sections of the report. The symptoms match perfectly. We can start treatment now that we know what we're dealing with. I stared at the papers, at the long medical term that finally gave a name to my personal hell. Can I have copies? Of course. He paused, studying my face. Are you going to tell your family? I thought about my father's cold dismissals, my mother's accusations, Alexandra's eye rolls when she thought I couldn't see. 12 years of being called lazy, attention-seeking, dramatic. 12 years of watching my sister bask in their pride while I drowned in their doubt. No, I said, carefully folding the papers and sliding them into my bag. Not yet. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the validation I'd spent over a decade searching for. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Alexandra just got another promotion. When are you going to get your life together? I held the diagnosis papers up to the light, reading the words again and again until they blurred through my tears. But these weren't tears of sadness or relief. They were tears of something else entirely. Now, I whispered to the empty room, they'll never get to say they were right again. I didn't know then how prophetic those words would become. I didn't know that karma was already in motion, spinning its web of consequences that would trap us all. I just knew that for the first time in 12 years, I had proof. And sometimes, proof is all you need to change everything. I was making coffee when Summer called, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't place. Have you checked the news? She asked. I try not to. It's bad for my health. I joked, but the tension in her voice made me pause. What's wrong? Check your email. I just sent you a link. I pulled up my laptop, clicked the link, and felt my coffee cup slip from my fingers. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but I barely noticed. The headline read, Rising Tech Executive Collapses During Keynote Speech. Below it was a photo of Alexandra being loaded into an ambulance, her perfectly styled hair splayed across a stretcher. She was giving a presentation to over 200 people, Summer explained. Witnesses say she just dropped mid-sentence. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Mom, no texts from Dad. Even as their golden child was rushed to the hospital, they couldn't bring themselves to reach out to their other daughter. Which hospital? I asked. Memorial. The same one where they refused to believe I was sick, I finished. Ironic. I didn't go right away. I waited 3 days, watching the local news coverage grow. Alexandra's company issued statements. Her boyfriend Damien gave interviews, looking appropriately concerned in his expensive suit. Still no word from my parents. When I finally walked into the hospital, I found them in the waiting room. Mom was pacing, her heels clicking against the linoleum. Dad sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. Eleanor? Mom stopped mid-stride. What are you doing here? I saw the news, I said. Thought I should check if my sister was dead. Dad's head snapped up. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I smiled. Like collapsing in front of 200 people? Before either could respond, Dr. Elliot emerged from the double doors. My doctor, the one who had finally believed me. Mr. and Mrs. Santiago, he said, we have the test results. Mom grabbed his arm. Is she going to be okay? What's wrong with her? Dr. Elliot's eyes found mine across the room. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private. They led us to a consultation room. Alexandra was there, propped up in a hospital bed, looking small and pale in her designer pajamas. Damien hovered nearby, his perfect hair slightly mussed. "It's a rare genetic condition," Dr. Elliot began, and my heart stopped. "The symptoms can be severe: chronic pain, fatigue, organ dysfunction." "No," Mom interrupted. "That's impossible. Alexandra has always been healthy." "Actually," Dr. Elliot continued, "this variant is more aggressive than typical cases. Without intervention, the prognosis is—" He paused, glancing at his papers. "Weeks, maybe months." Alexandra made a sound like a wounded animal. Damien grabbed her hand. "But there must be treatment," Dad said, his voice cracking for the first time in my memory. "A cure? There's a procedure," Dr. Elliot explained, "but it requires a very specific genetic match. We've checked the donor registry." I knew what he was going to say before he said it. Of course I did. The universe has a sick sense of humor that way. "There's only one viable match," he finished, looking directly at me. "Eleanor." The room went silent. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me, filled with different flavors of desperation. "Eleanor," Mom whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. "Please," Alexandra spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse. "I'm scared." I looked at her, really looked at her. Gone was the perfect makeup, the confident smirk, the air of superiority she'd worn like expensive perfume. For the first time in our lives, my sister looked breakable. "Dr. Elliot," I said, keeping my voice steady, "could I have a moment alone with my family?" He nodded and left. Damien tried to stay, but Alexandra waved him out. I walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where I'd once sat in my car, crying after another doctor told me nothing was wrong. "You know what's funny?" I said, not turning around. "I've been sick with this exact condition for 12 years. 12 years of begging you to believe me, to help me, to just see me." "Eleanor, we didn't know," Dad started. "No," I cut him off. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." I turned to face them. Mom was crying. Dad looked lost. Alexandra stared at her hands. "Now you need something from me," I continued. "Now I'm suddenly valuable. Now you believe in genetic conditions and chronic pain and all the things that made me a liar before." "Please," Alexandra whispered again. "I don't want to die." I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. "I'll think about it." As I left, I heard Mom collapse into tears. But it was Alexandra's silence that followed me down the hallway. The same silence that had followed my own cries for help all those years ago. They let me stew for exactly 6 hours before the texts started coming. First from Mom, then Dad, then Damien, who somehow got my number. I ignored them all and went to work, letting the familiar rhythm of typing drown out their digital desperation. The knock on my apartment door came at sunset. I knew it was Damien before I opened it. He had that kind of cologne that announced itself first. "Eleanor," he flashed his perfect teeth. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe. "About what?" "Look, I know things haven't been great between you and your family." He ran a hand through his expertly tousled hair. "But Alexandra needs you, and I'm prepared to make it worth your while." "Worth my while?" He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and showed me a banking app. "Name your price. 6 figures, easy. Think about what you could do with that kind of money." I laughed. "You think this is about money?" "Everything's about money," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Just tell me what you want." "What I want." I stepped closer. "I wanted someone to believe me when I was throwing up blood in college. I wanted my father to visit me in the hospital when I had a pain crisis so bad they thought I was dying. I wanted my mother to stop telling everyone I was just looking for attention." His smile faltered. "That was then. This is now." "You're right. This is now. And now I'm asking you, what changed? When did you all start believing in this condition?" "When Alexandra." "Exactly." I cut him off. "When Alexandra got it. Because she matters. She's always mattered more." He shifted uncomfortably. "That's not fair." "No, it's not. None of this is fair." I started closing the door. "Goodbye, Damien." "Wait." He stuck his foot in the doorway. "What do I tell her?" "Tell her I'm thinking about it." I slammed the door hard enough to make him yelp and pull his foot back. The next morning, my parents were waiting outside my building. Mom had brought coffee, my favorite kind, which she must have asked Summer about because she'd never bothered to learn it herself. Eleanor, please, she held out the cup like a peace offering. Just talk to us. Now you want to talk? I took the coffee but didn't drink it. 12 years of silence, and now you want to talk? Dad stepped forward. We made mistakes. We know that now. Do you? I turned to him. Do you remember what you said when I called you from the emergency room 3 years ago? His face went blank. You said, "Stop being dramatic, Eleanor. Alexandra's getting an award tonight and your mother needs to be there." Then you hung up. I took a sip of coffee. It was perfect, which somehow made it worse. I had a ruptured cyst. I could have died. We didn't know, Mom whispered. You didn't want to know. The words exploded out of me. Every time I tried to tell you something was wrong, you compared me to Alexandra. Every time I needed help, you told me to be more like Alexandra. Well, guess what? Now Alexandra is exactly like me, and suddenly this condition is real. She's dying, Dad said quietly. I was dying too, for years. But that didn't matter because it was just me, right? Mom reached for my hand. This time, I let her take it. Please, Eleanor, we're begging you, help your sister. I looked at their faces, really looked at them. Mom's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide her exhaustion. Dad's usual stoic expression had cracked, showing something that might have been regret. Remember my graduation? I asked suddenly. They exchanged confused looks. I couldn't walk across the stage because I was in too much pain. Alexandra gave a speech as valedictorian, and you told everyone I was hungover, that I was just jealous of her success. I pulled my hand away from Mom's. That was the day I stopped expecting anything from either of you. Eleanor, I'll think about it, I said, cutting off whatever excuse was coming. But not for you, and not because you're finally acting like parents. I turned to go back inside, then stopped. Oh, and Mom, next time you try to bribe me with coffee, remember that I'm lactose intolerant. Another medical fact you chose to forget. I left them standing there, the untouched coffee growing cold between them. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I stared at those words until they blurred. 12 years too late, but at least she was the first one to say it. I typed back a single word. Why? Her response came quickly, because now I know what it feels like to scream and have no one hear you. I turned off my phone without replying. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. My family was finally learning theirs. You know they're manipulating you, right? Summer said, watching me pack my overnight bag. This sudden kindness, the apologies, the daily gifts, it's all because they need something from you. I folded another sweater. I know. Then why are you going? Because I want them to remember this moment. I zipped up the bag. When they finally treated me like a human being, only because they needed my body parts. The family meeting was set for 7. I arrived at 7:15, just late enough to make a point. They'd gathered in Alexandra's hospital room, Mom, Dad, Damien, and my sister in her designer hospital gown. Eleanor, Mom jumped up. We were worried you wouldn't come. That's new, I said, setting down my bag. Usually you worry I will come. Alexandra winced. She looked worse than before, her skin taking on a yellowish tinge I recognized too well from my own mirror. We've been talking, Dad said, unusually gentle, about how to make this right. I sat in the visitor's chair, crossing my legs. Have you? We'll pay for any treatment you need, Mom rushed in. The best doctors, specialists, whatever it takes. Private nurses, Damien added. Home care. A new apartment? Dad said. Somewhere closer to us. I looked at each of their eager faces. And what about therapy? Of course, Mom nodded. Whatever kind you want. No, I leaned forward. Therapy for you, all of you, to understand why you spent 12 years watching your daughter suffer and decided she was lying. The room went quiet. That's reasonable, Alexandra said softly. We should do that. And public acknowledgement, I continued. Social media posts, family emails, whatever it takes to correct every time you told people I was crazy or attention seeking. Mom's face tightened, but Dad nodded. Done. And one more thing. I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app. I want you to listen to something I wrote. Really listen. I started reading. Age 17, first symptoms. Mom says I'm being dramatic. Age 18, collapsed in shower. Dad says I'm hungover. Age 19, hospitalized for 3 days. No visitors because Alexandra has a big presentation. Age 20, I read for 10 minutes. Every dismissal, every cruel word, every missed cry for help. By the end, Mom was crying. Dad stared at the floor. Alexandra had turned away, but I could see her shoulders shaking. That's not even half of it, I said, putting my phone away. But it's enough to make my point. We'll do everything you asked, Dad said. Just please help your sister. I stood up. I'll think about it. Think about it? Damien burst out. She's dying! I was dying too, I said calmly, for years. Funny how that only matters when it's Alexandra. I left them there, but instead of going home, I went to the hospital library. I spent hours researching what would happen if I refused, survival rates, alternative treatments, legal implications. The results were clear. Without my donation, Alexandra had weeks, maybe a month. There were no other matches in the registry, no experimental treatments available in time. My phone buzzed with a text from Summer. You okay? I wrote back. Did you know they can't legally force me to donate? They can't even take my organs if I die unless I've agreed to it. Her response came quickly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about power, I replied, and how they finally see me now that I have it. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the hospital cafeteria. We're planning a family dinner, she said, trying to sound casual, to celebrate once you and Alexandra are both recovered from the procedure. I stirred my coffee slowly. Am I invited this time? Unlike Alexandra's engagement dinner? She flinched. Eleanor, please, we're trying. No, you're desperate. There's a difference. She's your sister. Was I her sister when she told her friends I was faking it for attention? I looked up from my coffee. When she laughed about my mysterious illness at family gatherings? Mom gripped the edge of the table. People change. She's changed. No. I stood up. She's just scared. Like I was. Except when I was scared, no one came running to save me. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll be at your dinner. I grabbed my purse. And I'll have an announcement to make. About the donation? I smiled, the same smile Alexandra used to give me when she knew something I didn't. About everything. As I walked away, I heard Mom call after me. We're having it tomorrow night. Don't be late. I didn't turn around. Let them plan their celebration. Let them think they'd won. Tomorrow night, they'd learn what it really means when karma comes full circle. Mom outdid herself for the dinner. Crystal glasses, the good china, even fresh flowers, all the things she used to save for Alexandra's achievements. Alexandra herself sat at the table in a wheelchair, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, trying to look stronger than she was. A toast! Dad stood, raising his glass. To family, to healing, and to new beginnings. Everyone lifted their glasses. I took a small sip of wine, letting it linger on my tongue. Eleanor, Mom smiled, that bright, hopeful smile she'd been practicing all week. We have something for you. She pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. Inside was a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen, and keys to what she explained was a luxury apartment near their house. For after the surgery, she said, so we can take care of both our girls properly. Damien cleared his throat. And I've arranged for the best post-operative care money can buy. For both of you. I set down my wine glass carefully. That's very generous. We want to make things right, Dad said. A fresh start. Alexandra reached across the table with a shaking hand. I know it doesn't make up for everything, but we're trying, Elle. Really trying. I looked at their expectant faces, all glowing with relief and premature victory. They thought they'd won. They thought money and promises could erase 12 years of cruelty. I have an announcement, too, I said. Mom beamed. Of course, sweetheart. Tell us. I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment. I'm not doing it. The silence that followed was absolute. What? Alexandra whispered. I'm not doing the donation. I set down my glass. I won't be your donor. Mom's face went white. This isn't funny, Eleanor. No, I agreed. It's not funny at all. Kind of like how it wasn't funny when you told the whole family I was faking seizures for attention. But but we agreed, Dad stammered. The apartment, the care, everything you asked for. You can't buy redemption, I said, and you can't buy my body parts. Damien stood up so fast his chair fell backward. You can't do this. She'll die. Like I almost died? I kept my voice calm. 3 years ago, when I had organ failure and none of you answered your phones? That was different, Mom pleaded. We didn't know then. No, you didn't want to know. And now? I reached into my purse and pulled out a document. Now it's too late. Alexandra grabbed the paper with trembling hands. What is this? Legal documentation showing I removed myself from the donor registry over a year ago. I also filed paperwork specifically prohibiting donation of any organs or tissue to family members. I smiled. It's ironclad. My lawyer made sure of it. The room erupted. Mom screamed. Dad knocked over his wine glass. Damien started yelling about lawyers and lawsuits. But Alexandra just stared at me, tears rolling down her face. Why? Because 12 years ago, I needed my big sister, I needed my family, and you all decided I wasn't worth believing. I stood up slowly. Actions have consequences. Sometimes they take years to arrive, but they always come. You're killing her, Mom sobbed. Your own sister. No, I picked up my purse. Your disbelief, your cruelty, your years of dismissal, that's what's killing her. I'm just not offering a last-minute salvation. Please, Alexandra whispered. I'm scared. The same words from the hospital. But this time, they didn't touch me. I was scared too, I said. For 12 years. Funny how no one cared then. Dad grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. You can't do this. We're your family. I pulled away. Family believes each other. Family shows up. Family doesn't gaslight and abuse and then expect forgiveness when they suddenly need something. You're a monster, Damien spat. I paused at the door. No, I'm just the first person in this family to say no to Alexandra. Maybe if someone had done that sooner, she wouldn't have grown up thinking she could treat people like garbage without consequences. As I walked out, I heard Mom's wails, Dad's angry shouts, and Alexandra's quiet sobs. But over all of that, I heard something else, the sound of karma finally catching up. In my car, I took a deep breath and texted Summer. It's done. Her reply came instantly. Are you okay? I looked back at the house, at the chaos I'd left behind, at the family that only valued me when they needed parts of my body. No, I typed back, but for the first time in 12 years, I'm free. I drove away from their perfect house, their perfect dinner, their imperfect daughter who finally learned what it meant to be powerless. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to others. It's what you refuse to do for them. The story broke on a Tuesday. Tech executive denied life-saving donation by sister screamed the headlines. My phone exploded with notifications, messages, and death threats from strangers who thought they knew the whole story. Turn off your social media, Summer advised, closing my laptop. They're crucifying you out there. I was reading comments calling me a murderer when Damien's interview aired. He'd gone on national television, perfectly groomed in his grief, to tell the world about the heartless sister who refused to save her dying sibling. She's always been jealous of Alexandra, he said, wiping away camera-ready tears. This is her revenge. The next day, Mom's tearful interview followed. We're just trying to understand why she wants to punish us like this. I watched it all from my apartment, where I'd been holed up since the story broke. Summer brought groceries and checked my mail, which now included handwritten hate letters. You should tell your side, she said, sorting through the latest batch of threats. Fight back! I shook my head, but then my phone buzzed with a text from Alexandra. They're making you into a monster. Let me fix it. That was the final straw. I opened my laptop and started typing. The blog post began simply. I was 17 when I first realized something was wrong with my body. I was 29 when my family finally believed me, but only because my sister got sick too. I wrote everything. The years of pain, The dismissal, the isolation, the way they'd laugh when I couldn't get out of bed, the family events I missed because I was in the hospital alone, the time Mom told her bridge club I was in rehab when really I was getting treatment for organ inflammation. My sister is dying, I wrote near the end, and I'm supposed to save her because now, suddenly, this condition is real. Now, suddenly, chronic pain matters. Now, suddenly, my body has value, but only the parts they can cut out and give to her. I hit publish at 3 a.m., then turned off my phone. The post went viral by morning. Other chronically ill people started sharing their stories. Women wrote about medical gaslighting, about families who didn't believe them, about the particular pain of being dismissed by those who should protect you. I believe Eleanor started trending. Look at this. Summer showed me her phone. You've started a movement. The media narrative began to shift. Medical experts discussed the history of women being disbelieved by doctors. Psychologists talked about family trauma and medical abuse. My story wasn't just mine anymore, it had become a catalyst. Then Alexandra posted her response. My sister told the truth. She wrote on her company's website, I was cruel. We all were. We watched her suffer for years and chose not to believe her. I'm dying now, and I understand her pain in a way I never did before. But it's too late for understanding. Some debts can't be paid with apologies. The comments exploded. Finally, someone taking responsibility. Too little, too late. Karma is real. Damien showed up at my door that evening, no camera crew this time. Take it down, he demanded. Your blog post. Take it down, or I'll sue you for defamation. I leaned against the doorframe. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Everything I wrote is documented. Want to see my medical records? The hospital bills? The text messages? You're killing her. No, I said quietly. I'm just not saving her. There's a difference. He raised his hand like he might hit me, then thought better of it. This isn't over. Actually, it is. I started closing the door. And Damien, the security cameras in this hallway work great. Maybe think about that before you come threatening me again. After he left, I got another text from Alexandra. I meant what I wrote. I'm sorry. Not because I'm dying, but because I finally understand what living feels like for you. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Understanding only matters when it changes how you treat people. You had 12 years to understand. You chose not to. She wrote back immediately. I know, and now I have to live or die with that choice. That night, I sat with Summer on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars. What happens now? She asked. Now? I sipped my tea. Now they learn what it feels like to be powerless, to know something's wrong and not be able to fix it, to scream for help and have nobody listen. And Alexandra? I thought about my sister, lying in her hospital bed, finally understanding what it meant to be the one nobody could save. Alexandra gets what she always wanted, I said, to be just like me. The city hummed below us, indifferent to our small dramas of life and death. Somewhere in a hospital room, my sister was learning the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the consequences of our actions take years to arrive, but when they do, they come with interest. Alexandra died on a Thursday morning. I found out from a news alert on my phone while waiting for coffee at my favorite cafe. The barista saw my hands shaking and asked if I was okay. My sister just died, I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. She gave me my coffee for free. It was the kindest thing anyone did for me that day. The media circus started immediately. Reporters camped outside my apartment, shouting questions. How do you feel about your sister's death? Do you regret your decision? What do you say to people calling you a murderer? Summer helped me pack a bag that night. Iceland, she said, holding up my passport. Like we always talked about. You need to get away. 24 hours later, I stood on a black sand beach, watching waves crash against volcanic rock. The wind whipped my hair, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. We're having a private funeral. Please don't come. I typed back. Wasn't planning to. 3 days into my trip, while hiking a remote trail, my phone rang with an unknown number. Is this Eleanor? A woman's voice asked. This is Margaret Wells, Alexandra's lawyer. I sat down on a boulder, watching steam rise from a nearby hot spring. What do you want? Alexandra left something for you, a letter and other items. She was quite insistent about you receiving them after her passing. I don't want anything from her. She said you'd say that. The lawyer paused. She also said to tell you it's not what you think. It's not an apology or a guilt trip. It's the truth you deserve. I gave her my email address. The scanned letter arrived an hour later. Dear Eleanor, it began, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. That means I can finally tell you everything without fear of consequences. Because the truth is, I knew I was sick months before I collapsed. I had the same symptoms you described for years. The pain, the fatigue, everything. But I watched how they treated you, and I was terrified. Terrified of becoming the other daughter, the broken one, the one they didn't believe. So I hid it. I pushed through. I kept working and smiling and pretending until my body literally gave out in front of 200 people. I couldn't hide anymore after that, but by then it was too late. The disease had progressed too far. The doctors said even if you had agreed to donate, my chances were slim. I never told our parents that part. You were right about everything. About them, about me, about how we treated you. I was their perfect daughter because I learned early to hide anything that might make me less than perfect. You were braver than me. You asked for help. You told the truth. And we punished you for it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that your strength, the strength we mocked, was something I envied but never had. You survived 12 years of what killed me in months. There's more. In my private safe, you'll find documentation. Years of medical records showing early symptoms I hid, diary entries, everything you need to prove to our parents that their perfect daughter was just better at lying than you ever were. Do what you want with it. Burn it. Publish it. Use it to finally make them understand what they did to you. Or don't. Your choice. For once in our lives, I'm giving you the power to decide what truth they get to know. You didn't kill me, Eleanor. Our family's culture of perfection and denial did, and maybe, in the end, I killed myself by choosing their approval over my own survival. Be free, sister. You've earned it. Alexandra. I sat on that boulder until the sun set, reading the letter over and over. Summer called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. Finally, as darkness fell over the Icelandic landscape, I typed out an email to Alexandra's lawyer. Send me everything. Then I turned off my phone and started walking. The northern lights were beginning to dance across the sky, green and purple ribbons of light that made me feel small and insignificant. I thought about Alexandra hiding her pain behind perfect smiles, about Mom and Dad creating a world where their daughters had to choose between honesty and love, about the weight of secrets and the price of truth. Some debts are paid in silence, I whispered to the Arctic wind, others in blood. Yours was paid in both. The lights continued their dance, indifferent to my family's tragedy. Somewhere in a lawyer's office, a safe held the final act of our story, but for now, I just watched the sky and let myself feel something I hadn't expected. Peace. The package from Alexandra's lawyer arrived while I was still in Iceland. Summer forwarded me a photo of the sealed envelope, but I asked her to wait until I returned to open it. Are you sure you want to see what's inside? She asked when I finally sat at my kitchen table, staring at the thick manila envelope. No, I said, breaking the seal, but Alexandra made her choice. Now I need to make mine. The contents spilled across my table. Medical records, journal entries, hospital receipts paid in cash. Years of hidden doctor visits and secret symptoms, all carefully documented by my perfect sister who'd chosen silence over truth. She really was sick, Summer whispered, reading over my shoulder. All that time. And she watched them destroy me for having the same condition. I gathered the papers into a neat pile. She watched and said nothing. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Please come home. We need to talk. I looked at Alexandra's papers, then at Summer. Want to take a drive? They were waiting in their perfect living room when I arrived. Mom had lost weight. Dad looked older. Neither spoke as I sat down and placed Alexandra's records on the coffee table. What's that? Mom asked. The truth, I said, opening the first file. Alexandra's truth. I read them entries from her journal, descriptions of pain that mirrored my own. Secret doctor visits dating back 3 years. Prescriptions filled under false names. She was sick, I continued, watching their faces crumple. Long before her collapse, she just knew better than to tell you. Why? Dad's voice cracked. Why wouldn't she tell us? Because she saw what you did to me. I pulled out more papers. She wrote about it. How watching you dismiss my pain taught her to hide her own. How being the perfect daughter meant never showing weakness. Mom started crying. Dad just stared at the floor. You didn't just fail me, I said quietly. You failed both your daughters. The only difference is I survived it. What do you want from us? Mom whispered. Want? I laughed. I don't want anything from you. Alexandra left me these papers to use however I chose. I could publish them, expose your perfect family for what it really was. I could destroy what's left of your reputation. They both flinched, but I'm not going to do that. I stood up. Because Alexandra made her choice and she died with it. That's punishment enough. Then why show us? Dad asked. Because you need to live with the knowledge that you didn't just torture one daughter, you terrified the other into silence, into choosing death over disappointing you. I walked to the door. That's your karma to carry. Eleanor, wait, Mom called out. Please, can we try to fix this? I turned back one last time. Some things can't be fixed. Some debts can't be paid. Live with that. I have. The next morning, Dr. Elliot called. I heard you're back in town. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. We met in his office where a camera crew was setting up equipment. We're making a documentary, he explained, about chronic illness, medical gaslighting, and family trauma. Would you be interested in telling your story? I thought about Alexandra's papers, about all the other people suffering in silence. Yes, I said. But not just my story. My sister's too. The whole truth. He nodded. That's exactly what we need. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, not the one they'd tried to bribe me with, but one I'd chosen for myself, and started painting. It was something I'd always wanted to try, but never had the energy for before my treatment. The sunrise I was creating on canvas wasn't perfect. The colors bled into each other, the lines weren't straight, but it was honest, real, like the pain that still lived in my body, like the truth that finally lived in my words. Summer brought dinner and watched me paint. How does it feel? She asked. Being the last one standing? I dipped my brush in yellow paint. It feels like freedom, not the happy kind, the heavy kind, the kind that comes with knowing you survived something that killed someone else. And your parents? They'll live with their choices, just like Alexandra died with hers, just like I'm living with mine. I added another streak of yellow to my sunrise. It wasn't quite right, but it was mine, my truth, my pain, my healing. Sometimes that's all we get. Not perfect justice or complete closure, just the quiet victory of surviving and the courage to paint our own tomorrow. Some stories don't end with forgiveness, I said, stepping back from my canvas. Some end with truth. And sometimes that's enough.